Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, I'll have a double chocolate milkshake, a blueberry waffle with maple syrup as well, I told the waitress, with lots of vanilla ice cream, please. The waitress scribbled down my order, while my two best friends that worked with me in the office stared at me with agog expressions written on their faces, unable to disguise their level of shock at my ordering such a sweet, sickly concoction for lunch. I'll have a standard coffee, said Francine to the waitress, and a turkey on rye, please. And you? She asked, pointing to Nora. Oh, I'll have a nice coffee with tuna and cheese. A tuna and cheese toasted sandwich, that is, on granary bread, please. The waitress nodded her head dutifully, her blonde hair bobbing around her face buoyantly, as she diligently took our orders down, grabbed our menus, bustled away. It was a busy Friday lunchtime, in our favourite Seattle coffee shop, situated across the road from our office block, a popular place we regularly frequented, which meant we always booked a table well in advance, or you'd invariably always have a huge wait on your hands. The food was always excellent there, the vibe buzzing, electric, welcoming, convivial, fun. Glasses tinkled, cutlery clanged, rattled and jiggled, feet glided across the floor, moving purposely, quickly and efficiently to meet the tsunami of rising orders that came rolling in from every corner of the coffee shop. The waitresses, formally attired in black aprons, were heavily laden down with sumptuous plates piled high with delicious steaming food, making their way to a plethora of different tables for the hungry diners. Delicious smells of melted cheese, cinnamon and percolated coffee drifted in the air. Then there was the chatter of voices in different resonances, from high-pitched to gravelly, raspy, low and deep, mingled with the occasional chuckles or outbursts of spontaneous gay laughter. Sometimes the background music was so deafening you could barely hear yourself think, let alone your friends talk, which could be exceedingly annoying. But then we overlooked this minor disadvantage by just raising our voices above the crowd, only adding to the momentum of the noisy vibe of the coffee shop. "Why all the funny looks you're both giving me?" I asked Francine and Nora, who were staring at me with fixed, befuddled eyes as we waited for our orders to arrive. "Are you asking for a diabetic coma?" Nora asked me. "Why are you ordering all this sickly sweet stuff for lunch? It's not like you. You're not pregnant, are you?" she asked, raising a cynical brow. "Of course I'm not pregnant," I piped. "Chance would be a fine thing. If you must know, I need a pick-me-up. I'm feeling a little down in the dumps of late. I find sugar is one of the best amplifiers of mood. I think it's because sugar raises serotonin levels in the brain, the so-called happy chemical. Well, that's what my mother tells me anyway." "Well, if that's the case," said Nora, "give me a couple of dozen chocolate milkshakes, please. I'll be good to go then. No, seriously, Miranda, you look like something's beaten the wind out of your sails. What's irking you?" She paused for a moment, as if mulling over her own thoughts. "Now I've come to think of it, you've been rather flat all week. Not your usual chirpy, upbeat self. Are you going to enlighten us as to what's going on, or are we going to have to drag it out of you?" Nora's absolutely right, now I come to think of it. You have been a bit off recently. Go on, spill. What's going on? Asked Francine, her face registering concern. I shrugged my shoulders in a nonchalant way. Norma's getting married, I said flatly, as if I was talking about my next trip to the dentist. Nora and Francine exchanged perplexed private looks between each other. But that's good news, surely. She's your sister, is she not? Should you not be happy for her? My little sister, I corrected. I know I should be pleased for her, but I'm sorry, I just can't be, I said, grabbing the salt and pepper cellar and playing with them awkwardly on the table like the king and queen on a chessboard set, as I desperately tried to avoid eye contact with both my friends. Just thinking about this topic made me green at the gills. If you must know, I said, tears gathering around my eyelashes like opaque raindrops. If you must know, everyone my age is getting married, having babies, but not me. It's not fair. I'm the oldest daughter in my family, but I'm going to be the old maid, left behind, unmarried forever. My little sister is beating me to the altar. Do you know what it feels like to have your young sister showing you up like this? It makes me feel like I've been left behind, forgotten, abandoned, lost, disregarded. You an old maid, piped Nora, pooh-poohing the very idea. Don't be ridiculous, Miranda. You do say some outrageous things at times. As for being left behind, what on earth are you talking about? Why isn't that boyfriend of yours popping the question and proposing? What the heck is wrong with the man? He needs some serious shaking up. I don't know, I said. I don't know. The tears were now streaming down my cheeks as I wiped them away with my sleeve, sniffing very loudly, the self-pity consuming me, ensuring that flood banks from the tear ducts of my eyes were unable to restrain their heavy load. I began to sniffle, quiver, shake, and splutter, like the gas on a cooker that refuses to take. I mean, it's not as if I haven't dropped any hints all the time. I mean, how brazen do I have to get? We've been together for 7 years, for goodness sake. I don't know what's keeping him from asking me the question. We have such a fabulous relationship. Solid, strong, the best. And I know he loves me, I really do. But I don't understand why. Why he can't. The words seemed to choke me up, as if there was a huge fog developing in the back of my throat. Do you think he may have an aversion to marriage, perhaps? Asked Nora. Maybe he's scared to death of commitment. You do get men like that. I mean, what about his parents and their marriage? That might give you a greater perspective onto his kind of thinking at the moment. They split a while ago. A nasty divorce, I gather. His mother wasn't a good person. Caused a lot of undue upset. There you go, said Nora, reaching out to nudge my arm with her hand, giving it an affectionate squeeze, her body leaning over the table to quickly dab up my tears with a tissue. Look at you, she said, cleaning me up. You have a tsunami of mascara running down your face. You look exactly like a bad-tempered raccoon. If you must know, I do think your boyfriend has got some seriously cold feet. Maybe his parents' marriage has made him rather reluctant to tie the knot. That would make a heap of sense to me. He just needs a push in the right direction. Or maybe a great big shove on reflection. Well, what am I going to do? I said. How am I going to get him to pop the question, short of writing a sign on my back that screams, "Marry me," in bright red capital letters? I need to be a little bit more subtle than that, don't I? I want to settle down, have babies, but at this rate it's never, ever going to happen. I said, mopping the tears from my face. I'm going to be an old maid. Oh, my God, I'm going to be an old maid. At that moment the waitress arrived with our order, giving me a fleeting, rather concerned glance, as the evidence of my recent deluge of tears was apparent, as tissues had piled up around me like the fluffy clouds gathering in the sky, taking up the entire table in a sea of white confetti. She swept them away briskly with her hands, placing a long glass of chocolate milkshake in front of me. Blueberry waffles on the way, with extra ice cream, on the house. She gave me a gentle nudge, whispering in my ear, Whatever it is, don't let it get you down, dear. Tomorrow's another day. I was touched by a stranger's kindness. She was so very sweet. I drank down the icy-cold sweet chocolate beverage with the gusto of a young kid. The glorious, thick, creamy concoction melted down my throat, electrifying my taste buds with sweetness, soothing my mouth with its cold richness. Suddenly the world seemed a much more agreeable, less daunting place. The sugar had certainly done the trick. Nora continued, "Well, you need to be a lot less subtle in getting that boyfriend proposing to you. The way I see it, subtle ain't cutting it for you. Otherwise, if it had, it would have already worked by now. You need to be a lot more direct. Put a wedding magazine in his truck, open on a page where the married couple are staring adoringly into each other's eyes. Or write in the dust on his driver's side window, 'Marry me.' Think about it. He need never know it's you, but at least it'll get his thoughts shifted in the right direction." "That's too obvious," said Francine. "What can she do short of asking him herself?" "Oh, that's it," said Nora excitedly. "You've hit the nail on the head, Francine. Why didn't I think of that myself? It's staring at us blindly in the face. Of course. You must be the one to ask Laurie to marry you. Don't beat about the bush, girl. Just do it. Take the plunge. Be done with it. What have you got to lose? Think about it. You've got everything to gain." "But I can't do that. That would be crazy. Preposterous." "No, it's not," said Nora, her eyes growing round like saucers, her enthusiasm babbling over in an exuberant crescendo like the overflowing bubbles from a champagne bottle that has burst its cork under an expression of way too much haste. "Don't you see? It's a leap year. This changes absolutely everything." "Well, what's that got to do with anything?" asked Francine, looking nonplussed. "Everything. Absolutely everything. Women can ask men to marry them on a leap year. It's a fact." The more I thought about it, the more excited I became. Of course, it did make perfect sense. I should be the one doing the proposing. Granted, I would far sooner it was the other way round, but a girl can't have everything, can she? I mean, what girl did not want her man to get down on his bended knees and pop the question? Yet there was exceptional circumstances, of which this clearly was one of them. I mean, Laurie needed a shove, not just a gentle push to get him on the right path. Nora was right. This was a leap year, the quintessential excuse to propose. Sometimes in life you have to take the bull by the horns, apply a little courage to the steering wheels, unleash the handbrake, start up the engine, accelerate, then leap towards the stars to gather your dreams like the apples on a tree. For just leaving them to rot on the branches if they failed to fall was not a good idea, any way you looked at it. At the end of the day I had bought a bunch of bright yellow roses, along with a bottle of the finest French champagne, as well as a pretty white jersey dress, which would go well with my boots, I thought. After all, I did want to look good tonight, given the nature of the mission at hand. I had never bought a man flowers before, but if I was going to do the proposing right, I didn't want to turn up empty-handed. That just didn't feel right for a marriage proposal somehow. I was going to ask him tonight, I decided unequivocally. I began in capturing what I was going to say in my mind, almost as if I was auditioning for a part in a play at the State Theatre. "Laurie," I would say on bended knees, handing him the roses, "it's a leap year, so I was wondering, would you make me very happy by agreeing to be my husband?" Keep it short and simple, I thought to myself. No frills. Men didn't like frills, unless of course you were wearing them. The traffic in Washington had reached a gridlock, with wary, over-exhausted, impatient drivers sounding their horns obtrusively. But I didn't care a jot. Normally by now I would be groaning, hitting my head against the steering wheel in frustration. But tonight I welcomed the hold-up. Like an old friend, it gave me time to refashion and rehearse what I was going to say to my potential future fiancé. I was giddy with nervousness, twitchy but excited. Who knew in a couple of hours from now there was the potential possibility that I might very well be an engaged woman. Laurie Chandler lived about an hour and a half's drive away from Seattle, in a remote farmhouse off the beaten track with his father. In the same vein of his father, he was somewhat estranged from his mother, wanting little to do with her, claiming she had broken their hearts through a series of not very discreet adulterous affairs. Yet whenever I broached the subject with him, he would look at me with steely eyes and say, "Miranda, please, I don't want to talk about this subject any more." Why would I want to rip open an old wound? What would be the good in that? I had known better not to challenge him on this. Let's not kid, I was eager to get to the house as soon as I possibly could. But I've always prided myself with being a vigilant driver, so driving cautiously was a no-brainer for me. Furthermore, I loathed driving in the dark, avoiding it like the plague whenever possible, but not tonight, especially not tonight. Even Laurie was completely clueless I was coming. After all, every impetuous marriage proposal needs its measure of unheralded surprise, an unguarded moment, heightened by its spontaneous unexpectancy. The velvety black sky swathed the landscape in a dense, foggy, tenebrous atmosphere, devoid of light, with the exception of a few rather obscure silvery stars, whose sparkle seemed less discernible this dusky evening, almost like diamonds that had lost their gleaming, twinkling lustre under a thick petticoat of congealed dust. Even the moon was puritanical, minimalistic, parsimonious in its showing this evening, so that even the ponderosa pines, Douglas firs and spruce trees, rising up so proudly like statuesque giants on the embankments that graced either side of this long winding ribbon of asphalt, seemed to swagger against the breeze. Their menacing, sultry, triangular silhouettes jiggled ominously. If you were not too careful, the shadowy movements of the vegetation could create in your flight of fancy all kinds of ghostly deliberations that were eager to haunt your darkest nightmares. But I refused to indulge myself in such ruminations. It was not uncommon to be the only truck on the road at night, but this was a journey I made regularly, so there was nothing about the lonely drive that raised my hackles. Not until, that is, when I heard the inauspicious, ear-splitting, high-pitched siren of a police truck trailing behind me, pressurizing me to stop and pull over to the side of the solitary, remote country road. I glanced briefly through my rear window to see a truck with a flashing bright blue light on it that didn't seem like a traditional police vehicle pulling up behind me, drawing to a pretentious stop. There was no reason that I should be pulled over like this, I thought, but I dutifully obliged like a reckless lamb to the slaughter, despite the fact that my internal antennae could feel that something was intrinsically wrong. I didn't have a damaged tail light, my license had not expired, I was not driving above the speed limit, all my lights were working perfectly. Nothing was wrong. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I physically relaxed when I saw the reassuring uniformed figure of a police officer climb out of his vehicle, walking over to my truck. I would have to check his badge to be absolutely sure he was legit, but with the exception of his truck, he almost certainly looked the part, I thought to myself. I could hear his heavy footfall as he crunched the tarmac under his leather boots, whereby he brazenly approached my truck, tapping on the window with his finger, his head bent down against the glass to peer in at me, like a goldfish in a bowl. "Is there a problem, officer?" I asked, rolling down my windscreen slightly, but not all the way. I studied him studiously through my blue eyes. He was tall, lean, muscular, built like a lightweight boxer with a golden tan, earned from what I had judged must be copious amounts of time spent languishing in the hot sun like a lizard on a lounger in some fabulously sunny location, drinking pina coladas. His triangular squinty eyes seemed to be very deep-set, small and tight, like that of a bull terrier. His large Roman beak-like nose was very distinctive, while a chevron-style thick moustache graced the stretch of skin above his mean-looking lips. The tight crew-cut from beneath his cowboy hat revealed a scattering of fine hair as black and as shiny as a raven's feathers. He could have been handsome, but there was something so shifty about his stance, a greedy, hungry, predatory, savage look in those eyes of his, like a bird of prey. There was something about this man that instinctively set my nerves on edge, but instead of listening to that intuitive inner voice, I was lulled into a false sense of security, simply by the heartening, affirmative appearance of the uniform that until now had made me feel secure, confident, and tranquilized. "I've just had a report of someone's truck fitting your truck's description, driving very dangerously down this road. Now I need to tell you, miss, without any street lights, driving at a speed like this is asking for trouble. You could run over a deer, randomly hit a tree, skid in a pothole in the road, of which there are many in these parts." "But, officer," I protested indignantly, "I wasn't driving dangerously at all. I would not wantonly break the law. It's not in my character to do so. It must have been someone else you received a report about. There are lots of trucks all over the state fitting my truck's description perfectly. I can assure you of that. I haven't seen a car for miles apart from yours. I assure you I've never even had a parking fine a day in my life. I'm not about to start breaking the law right now, am I?" "Let me see your license." I handed it to him. He studied it for a brief second. "Right. It looks above board to me," he said, handing it back to me stiffly. His flinty eyes darted around my truck like a ferret. He was brazenly using his flashlight to investigate the interior of my truck. The bright light lingered from my face, wavering over the white knit dress for a while that I was wearing, then glided up to the dashboard, along the leather seats, where it lingered and parked its dazzling bright beams over the bottle of French champagne that was seated upright on the passenger seat, next to the bouquet of now drooping yellow roses. "So you've been drinking," said the officer, pointing to the champagne with his torchlight. "I knew it. I suspected as much. You've been drinking." He said this with such jubilation. The delight in his voice almost caught me off guard. I certainly hadn't anticipated this. "No," I said, shaking my curly head of blonde hair vigorously, so that the angry curls bounced around my pale face indignantly. "Are you kidding, officer? The champagne is a present for someone, if you must know. But I've not personally touched a single drop." "I'm not convinced. Get out of the truck. I need to give you a breathalyzer." All right, I said, climbing out of my truck, feeling more than a little flustered. "I want you to walk in a straight line. I need to make sure you're not intoxicated." "This is ridiculous," I piped. "Can you not see I'm sober? Do I look the slightest bit wasted to you?" "Look," I said, demonstrating my point by walking up and down in a perfectly straight line for him without the slightest hint of a wobble. "See, I'm walking straight. Where's the breathalyzer test you want to use on me? I'll prove it to you once and for all." "Young lady, you are highly intoxicated." I was about to protest my innocence when he grabbed my hands behind my back, plunging them in a pair of cuffs, virtually dragging me, kicking and screaming, to his truck. "Let me go! Let me go! What are you doing? Are you completely mad? I'm not drunk. Can you not see? I'm not drunk. Let me go!" I watched in horror as he pulled off the mock police light from the roof of his truck, thrusting it under one of the seats to hide it away. This whole thing had been completely staged, just to get me to cooperate, while I'd fallen for his duplicitous, guileful act, hook, line and sinker. The man roughly thrust me down on the passenger seat, withdrawing a revolver from his holty at the side of his belt, holding it directly against my temple. "Now you do what I say. Be a very good girl, or I will blow your head off. Do you understand?" I nodded, my throat clogging up with a thick fog of impending dread. "You're not a police officer, are you?" "Who are you? What do you want with me? You've no right to abduct me like this. It's against the law." "Shut up, you little vixen, will you? Do as I say. You'll be fine, just fine if you do." My heart sank like a heavy stone, plundering to the depths of a murky lake. I knew I was in big trouble, big trouble, but this was not a scrape you could get out of easily, like undoing a few drop stitches in some knitting. How could I escape the man? He had a revolver pointed at me. My hands were incapacitated by the cuffs. If that wasn't bad enough, the central locking system in his car had been activated. What an idiot I was, I thought. A perfect idiot. I should have known by the hungry look he was giving me that his intentions were highly nefarious, likely even sexual. Was he intent on raping me, I wondered? Worse still, leaving me dead? I was now scared, really scared. My whole body began to shake violently, trembling, jiggling, wobbling, quivering, wavering, convulsing, like a boat being shaken violently by a punnelling, treacherous windstorm out at sea. The man looked at me disapprovingly. "Stop bloody shaking, vixen. I told you, if you do as I say, all will be fine." "But what do you want with me? What do you want with me?" I stammered. "Take a look at yourself, vixen. You're as pretty as a picture. What do you think I want with you? A nice little chat that I can get with my grandmother. But you," he said, his eyes devouring me with a greedy look, "you can fill other areas for me very nicely indeed. Your whimsical, naive, innocent flesh I like. My woman that way. Always have, always will. Untainted, unspoilt, uncorrupted, noble. Very noble," he said with a powerful emphasis on the last word. "You're not going to kill me. I'll do anything you ask, but please, please don't kill me. I won't even tell the police. I promise you I won't, but just let me go." "If you're a good girl, I might just let you go, but that depends on your good behaviour and your cooperation." He grinned as he eyed the terror in my eyes with a degree of pleasure. It seemed to almost delight him in some obscene way, as if my angst was in a strange way quite erotic to him. I bit my lips tightly, knowing that trying to protest with him was not a very good idea, by any manner of means. On the contrary, it could make things 1,000 times worse for me. Before long he parked his truck on the side of the embankment, obscured from the road by a couple of logpole pine trees. The odorous man commanded me to get out of his truck, pulling me out, placing a light torch on my head. I staggered out of the passenger side door, like an inebriated drunk, almost stumbling to my feet, feeling so unsteady as I stood up. The heels of my inappropriate, moderately high shoes were sinking into the soft earthen dark floor, tripping me up at every given opportunity. My heart was pounding violently in my chest, my head was racing, with thousands of scenarios about what was about to unfold. Keep calm, I told myself. Your job now is to stay alive. Everything else he does pales into insignificance. Remember that. Where are we going? I trembled as he removed the cuffs from my hands. Just keep walking, came the man's dry voice. Any funny moves, I'll blow your brains right out. So don't get clever with me. Before long we approached a run-down abandoned shack in the woods. Get in there, he said. Now. I almost tripped over the old floor as I moved into the room. I could see that it had recently been repaired, as old wooden panels had been replaced with young wood, and even the roof appeared to have been repaired. My heart sank. It looked like this man had made a cosy little den for himself in the heart of the woods, as there was an old mattress on the floor of the shack, covered with blankets, but the blankets were covered with layers upon layers of soft hay and fresh mosses, which on first appearances seemed oddly bizarre. There were a couple of crates of Mountain Dew, several bags of peanuts on the side of the bed, some that had been eaten, as the empty bags were strewn across the floor. What if he was planning to keep me here indefinitely, like some kind of perverse slave? The horrifying thought whirled through my mind like the washing in the drum of a machine, for I had noticed that the open door did possess a padlock. The man lighted up 2 kerosene lamps in the room, perched on a couple of camping tables. The light flooded the area in a gentle light. Someone's been in here, he said, his voice sounding less than thrilled. Who's put all this bloody straw all over the place, and all this moss? It's absolutely disgusting. The place looks like a stable. Still, it'll have to do, he groaned. Nothing is going to spoil our fun together tonight, he said, giving me a wry smile. Remove all your clothes now, he said, pointing the rifle in my face. Remove them very, very slowly. I trembled in terror, my hands almost disabled from obeying his advice. Did you hear me? Get those goddamned clothes off. And I said slowly, but I didn't say gridlock. You're seriously sick, having to hold a woman at gunpoint like this just to get your evil way with her. What's wrong with you? Can't you get a girlfriend of your own, that you have to go picking up random women off the street? I wonder what your grandmother would think if she knew what you were doing to me. The words cut him hard, without anything to cushion or subdue the blow, which was rather like a bucket of cold water flung across his face, for the man's demeanour shifted dramatically from the face of a guileful man to a guilty little boy, who knew he was doing something grievously wrong. Somehow pictures of his grandmother perceiving what he was doing with me shook the foundations of his being, robbing his warped fantasies of their erotic appeal, which subsided as fast as a kid's quick descent down a slippery slide. What the heck did you bring my grandmother up for? You've gone and spoilt the mood, he complained, his rifle wavering with confusion in his hands, as if somehow he now had serious doubts of orchestrating his insidious plans upon me. For in his mind's eye, visions of his grandmother's face loomed before him, like a bright, dazzling Christmas decoration that could not be overlooked. The man was still pointing the revolver at me, but his fingers were unsteady, nervous even. His aim was rather wobbly. It was as if he wasn't certain what his next move should actually be. Thankfully, he'd stopped asking me to undress. Quite suddenly, the door of the barn swung open wide, with a loud creak. There, standing in the doorway, was a giant female Bigfoot. I'm not sure what induced her to enter a dilapidated shack, where she was clearly nesting, for the light of the kerosene lamps through the crumbling shack windows must have been clearly visible, giving her advance warning that someone was there. For me, seeing this anomalous creature was so utterly extraordinary. It was like my paradigm of the world shifted 180 degrees, for I had never believed that such a creature existed in our reality. But here she was, larger than life, majestic, powerful, tall, lofty, exceedingly big. I would describe her as about 7 foot tall, with a pyramid-shaped head, very short neck, lean muscular body, overlong arms, powerful legs, and long flowing dark hair that swathed her entire body. The grey skin beneath the hair was very discernible, along with the ropey muscular definition of her torso muscles that were so bodacious they were enviable. The Bigfoot's face possessed a soft feminine contour that announced her gender very precisely, beyond her full heavy breasts that dangled low upon her chest. Her chin was rounded and gentle, the graceful contours of her face almost pretty. The furrowed forehead was sloped and densely wrinkled, the skin dark and leathery, the aquatic nostrils large and flared. Her eyes seemed deep-set and dark, that in certain obscure lighting gave off an orangey-red eye-shine. My captor turned around to face the Bigfoot. The astonishment on his face was arresting. His slit eyes seemed to widen slightly, with an expression of undisguised horror in their depths. Yet oddly enough he failed to scream, as I sanctioned that the words had eluded him, held to ransom by his crippling, destabilizing fear. The Bigfoot's eyes seared through him like an X-ray machine at an airport, going through the luggage, eyeing out every single nook and cranny that may be hiding any insidious dark secret. In that poignant moment, I realized without a shadow of a doubt that the creature was literally telepathic. So I used this quintessential opportunity to shout to her in my mind, "Please help me! This man is trying to kill me, rape me, harm me. I'm not sure which, but please help me, please!" I said all this in my mind. The creature heard my thoughts, for her head swiveled in my direction like an owl's. Her face was lit by recognition. An all-knowing knowledge seemed to grab her attention. Her eyes darted to me, holding my eyes in hers for a moment like a gentle, encouraging hand, with a loving reassurance that magically transpired only between the two of us. In that second, I knew this creature had my back. In a trice, the Bigfoot's demeanour changed towards my captor. She became like a belligerent, protective mother towards me. Her shrewd, savvy eyes saw the revolver that was now hanging almost loosely in my abductor's hands. She was clearly acquainted with this weapon of horror, which she held in little regard. Her anger rose like an undulating high wave in the ocean, crashing to the shore with a forceful discharge. She snatched the revolver from him with little difficulty, for it slipped out of his hands like butter. My captor did not move a muscle, nor did he flinch or even react. He seemed frozen in space and time, locked in a trance like a spell of which he was now held prisoner. Even his eyes looked glazed like a dead fish. The Bigfoot grabbed his head in her hands, thrusting it towards her face. She glared into his eyes, her own eyes like sharp daggers. As she did this, her lips curled back. She screamed into this man's face so loudly that the vibration of her ear-piercing yell caused the entire shack to wobble and shake. The man screamed, "No! No! No!" The Bigfoot twisted his head around itself as if opening a jar of pickles, past the point of no return, where the neck clicked. I knew then he was dead. He was a goner. She then tugged the head off the neck in disgust, rather like the grape off its stem, throwing the head out of the shack like a soccer ball, where it rolled on the ground and then stopped. My whole body was flooded with relief, as if the dull aches of my fear had been soothed away by a warm shower. I instinctively ran into the Bigfoot's arms, sobbing and sobbing and sobbing, wetting the hair on her chest with a deluge of my tears. I felt no fear in her arms, only a mother's protective love. Her body smelt beautiful, like a pine forest. She was gentle, kind, reassuring, loving towards me. I felt safe and secure in her charge. She patted my back, drawing me ever closer towards her chest, pressing her pyramid-shaped head over mine, rocking me backwards and forwards in her arms like a baby, while whistling to me a rather musical tune to calm down my wearied thoughts. I could hear her words speaking in my head. "You're safe now. You're safe now." The Bigfoot guided me graciously through the woods, where I managed to get into the man's truck, which I then used to drive back to my own truck. Even that journey in my mind is a blur, as I was literally operating on autopilot. Those were not the days of cell phones, so I wasn't in a position to call anyone for help. But even if I had been, I doubt I would have. All I wanted to do was to get back to my boyfriend's house as fast as I could. The bright door of Laurie's farmhouse bolted open, as he rushed out of the house, propelled by a feeling that something was terribly wrong. He took me into his arms, while the floodbanks of my eyes burst open yet again, and I began to sob and sob on his shoulders. What was wrong with me? Forget water shortages. I was a mobile water bank. "Miranda," he piped, "what's wrong? You're scaring the hell out of me. What happened? You're freaking me out." "I was nearly killed tonight. Raped, maybe. Maybe both. I'm not sure which." Laurie's face grew grim and dark like an overcast sky. I could see his square jawline twitching and stiffen. His fists began to clench as his hands folded and opened again and again. His hazel eyes were indignant, furious, enraged. "Where is he?" he demanded. "I'll kill the man myself. Wait until I get my hands on him. He'll wish he'd never been born by the time I've finished with him." "He's dead," I piped. "A Bigfoot killed him. She knew I was in trouble. She saved my life. I think she was telepathic. I spoke to her in my mind. She understood. She understood what he was doing to me. She came to my rescue." At that, Laurie's face looked dumbfounded, but he knew that I wasn't making up a fanciful story like this. He knew me too well for that. "She's a bloody hero. A bloody hero." My boyfriend ran me a hot bubble bath. He then prepared me a hot cup of chocolate, watching me like a hawk, scared to get me out of his sight, as I sat there drinking the chocolate on the settee, with my feet curled beneath me. "What's wrong?" I asked. I could see the anger still boiling over in Laurie's face. He appeared to be smouldering like the embers left behind in a crate after a fire. "I just wish I could have killed that man myself," he said, slamming his fist onto the sofa next to me over and over again. I could see Laurie's eyes misting over as a worried look began to envelop his face. He took me lovingly in his arms, squeezing me so tightly, as if he was terrified of letting me go ever again. He kissed the bouncy curls of my hair with his warm lips, pulling the loose strands away from my face, while his eyes burned into mine with such a tangible love that even words could not express. "I don't know what I would have done if I'd lost you tonight," he said, almost choking up with an internal ache that was so pronounced that even I could perceive it. "You're my world, Miranda. I don't know what I would do without you. Marry me," he said suddenly. "Marry me, Miranda." "Yes," I said, a joyous squeak emanating from the back of my throat that sounded like a mouse. I'll marry you." It was with great trepidation I filed a police report with Laurie's help, making it as vague and obscure as I possibly could, for the protection of my Bigfoot friend, feigning that my fear had played havoc with my memory, so that I couldn't remember places and times and stuff like that. Although I did tell them the truth about the man, how he had tried to harm me, but assured them that he had been frightened off by an aggressive bear in the area, which had given me a fighting chance to escape. I knew well if the authorities got wind of the true story, if they were to believe my nonsensical account, that is, the female Bigfoot's life could potentially be in peril, and that was a risk I was not prepared to take. She had protected me. I would protect her. Even Laurie assured me that some of the Earth's most dangerous predators are of the human kind, so I'm sure that there are many of us that would go out of a limb to deny the creature's existence just to keep them safe. That's what I've done for many years now. I know I'm not alone in this. Luckily, this event happened over 25 years ago. I know the decomposing body of a man was recovered from the woods. A bear attack was deemed the likely cause of his death from the post-mortem examination. The man in question was a person of interest in regards to the bodies of 2 missing females found lying not far from this location, where I was abducted. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I really love the way people share their Bigfoot encounters with you, by opening their hearts. I hope to do justice in sharing with you mine, for I am a staunch believer in serendipity. I'm not inclined to trust in random chance, as I believe the sequence of life flows smoothly, like a river on a purposely preordained course. That is why we should never be disheartened or dismayed by what life throws at us. It is all part of a spectacular divine plan, a resplendent tapestry, of which we are one of those rich golden threads. I believe the experiences that greet us along this journey of ours were unequivocally premeditated and mapped out for us before we were ever born, although our reaction to these events is exclusively of our own making. In simple terminology, let's just say that rather like a thunderous current beating against a rolling stone with an almighty force, is exactly like the loving hands of the Creator, shaping us with his tooth chisel, moulding us, chiseling us, sharpening us into becoming instruments of great worth, transforming us into the best versions of ourselves that we can possibly be. Granted, sometimes the lessons in life are very hard, cruel even, but then no sculptor worth his weight in gold ever created a masterpiece out of a rock that he did not chip away at or gouge at the surface with some very hard blows. In my humble opinion, and I'm so sorry to say this, but this is how I intrinsically feel, some obscure nonsensical story of a blob of dense black hair passing your truck that you are convinced was a Bigfoot is not a fully satisfying story at all, for it lacks depth, substance, gratification, especially to the person listening to such an unsatisfactory account. I'd liken it to tasting a tiny nibble of a sumptuous, spectacular strawberry cheesecake, but never fully experiencing the full feeling of enjoying the entire slice. In such a case, you would walk away feeling dissatisfied, deprived, hungry, and unfulfilled. I'm sure you would agree that a simple taste of the cheesecake does not give you a full impression or measure of it, for indeed you need substantially more to fully appreciate its lofty creaminess, rich layers of flavour, sweetness from the strawberries, sourness from the cream cheese, and of course the crisp-textured base. You can only ever achieve that place of satisfaction, gratification, or nirvana, if you like, when you indulge in the entire slice. Only then can you rub your stomach in gleeful contentment or consummation, knowing that you enjoyed that cheesecake to the fullest. The pleasurable, rewarding memory will stay with you, for anything that is rarely good always invariably does. The trivia, the mundane, the unimpressive will be deleted from your mind like the wispy smoke from a chimney on a cold winter's night. So this is what a story should be. Otherwise it's no story at all. How could it be? For if its memory fades soon after you hear it, it touches not your heart, or fails to provoke in you thoughtful meditation or insight. Ostensibly, then its purpose was pointless, meaningless, and of no abiding value. In my case, it was a series of serendipitous events that led me to encounter the hairy man, or as we say here in Florida, the skunk ape, as he's widely known in these parts. I assure you, without enlightening you about the bizarre sequence of events that ultimately led to my encounter with the skunk ape, you would be exorbitantly robbed of the full experience. I would not want to do that to you, nor to your listeners. That would be like offering you a crumb, and you deserve better than that, much better. You deserve a full slice of the action, as if you were there yourself with me at that very point in time. In fact, I would love nothing better than to lead you by the hand into the heart of my story. I would like you to join me in the Florida swamps, to meet the skunk ape yourself. While I can't take you there literally, I hope to do so figuratively, so please come with me. I was born and raised in Florida, by two very loving parents. My mother Hilda was exceedingly intense. She took life way too seriously, failed to see the humour in anything, while my father was as laid back and chilled as a lazy crocodile sunning himself on a blissfully warm rock. I loved my father because his easygoing manner brought a measure of calm in my life, like a cool, refreshing breeze that I always appreciated, which helped me immensely when studying for exams or being involved in stressful situations of any kind. He would say, "Big deal. So what if you fail? What's the worst that can possibly happen?" While my mother would react very adversely, as if the whole house had suddenly been caught up in a tornado, swept away by a gale-force wind. If I were to fail at anything, that is. I think I was afraid I would break my mother, like a fragile figurine that takes flight off the mantel, leaving behind hundreds of broken shards. I don't think she could have emotionally taken it if my grades had been poor. Thankfully, they weren't. We lived in a sprawling bungalow, on a spacious plot of land, along with many of the other similar nondescript houses in our neighbourhood, all looking much the same as ours, lacking the quintessential charm and character seen in more historic old-world homes. I would never describe those homes as pretty, but they were basic, practical, and suited our needs. We lived in an area surrounded by unforgiving, swampy marshland, some that could not be accessed by foot. Black caiman crocodile country, shall we say, full of snakes, alligators, poisonous spiders, such as black widows, brown recluse, fire ants, unfriendly insects that revelled in nipping every area of your exposed skin if you gave them half a chance. Of course, there is beauty in this marshland, seen in the voluptuous shapes of the cypress, willows, tupelo and black gum trees, with their sculptural trunks rising in pretty twists, curls and spirals through the water, their lower submerged trunks usually swollen up by the water it imbibes. Then there are the viridescent, resplendent, vibrant greens of the brush, along with the cattail reeds, horsetails, papyrus, marsh marigolds. But sadly the beauty can so often be overshadowed by the perfidious treachery of such a place. For lurking down low in the dark shadows of the murky water, you might just suddenly see an eye open. From what you initially perceived was just a piece of driftwood. That, you realise, was not a piece of wood after all. Suddenly you discern the lateral wave-like motions of a jagged tail meandering unsuspectedly towards you. Your safety becomes seriously compromised as it nears its menacing approach. So growing up, my family avoided the swampy marshland that fringed the borders of our home, pretty much like the plague. It was a hostile, unfriendly environment, wrought with many hidden dangers that we wisely chose not to embrace. I do remember it was in the cruel summer of 1982, when I was about 15 at the time. The weather had been unbearably hot, uncompromising, very unpleasant. It had been a day like any other. But our next-door neighbour came bolting through our house like a rock being flung through a window, not even extending the common gracious courtesy of even taking the trouble to knock. I'll never forget the pained, wretched look on her face as she dashed into our house. I was in the living room at the time playing Scrabble with my younger sister Sabrina, as staying out of the unrelenting vicious heat by remaining indoors was one way to keep cool. The rounded, well-upholstered 400-pound woman was seemingly bursting out of her tight-fitting flowery dress that made her look like a sausage stuffed, as it was several sizes too small for her, and was taking strain under her desperate movements, as if the seams of her dress were about to pop open. But those things were of little consequence to us at the time. It was her demeanour that grabbed our attention, as she was oscillating her arms around wildly, like a frantic octopus. Her incomprehensible words, burbling, trembling, like the jiggling crystal glasses perched on the sideboard of our bar area. She looked like a wounded woman, someone who had the weight of the world on her shoulders, as if she was crumbling beneath a heavy load, and quite literally collapsing under the strain of her emotional, frenzied turmoil. She was not crying, but her eyes were wide, alarmed, terrified. "Are you all right, Mrs. Jameson?" I asked clumsily, dropping my whole line of Scrabble pieces on the floor, for I could sense her terror. It charged the atmosphere of the entire room with electricity that literally raised your antennae, making you mindfully aware that something was desperately wrong. Very wrong indeed. But what it was, we couldn't even begin to imagine. "Howard!" she asked, looking at me in desperation. "Where's your father?" she stammered. "Where's your father? I need his help right now. I need his help right now." "What's wrong, Ruth?" said my father, entering the room, sensing the woman's rising level of trepidation, and all too eager to help the poor woman in any way that he possibly could, as he knew that her husband was spending time with relatives in Texas, and she was all on her own. "Please help!" she cried, her strained voice sounding tiny, squeaky like that of a mouse, as if she was struggling to get the words out. Little Bobby told me that Liesel went to the swamp to play with the crocodiles." At that my father's expression sank, like the bright golden sun fading after a long sunny day, only to be replaced by dark, looming thunderclouds. He grimaced. What? What did you say, Ruth? Please, say that again." Little Bobby told me that Liesel went to the swamp to play with the crocodiles. I don't think he was kidding either. I can find no sight or sound of her. Please hurry. If she's out there in the swamp, I don't know what I will do. The crocodiles will eat her." "Calm down, Ruth. I'm sure your daughter hasn't gone far. We'll do our level best to find her. Now, don't you worry." My father grabbed his rifle, told the women to call the sheriff at once, unhesitantly ventured into the dismal, primeval, swampy area that fringed our properties on the furthest side to search for the little girl, his heart heavy, fearful of what he would or would not find. For indeed in the heart of crocodile country it would be easy for an innocent little 8-year-old girl to go amiss, never to be seen or heard from again. For a predatory crocodile is remarkable at hiding the evidence of his duplicitous endeavours, while an 8-year-old girl would be a welcome hearty snack. As my father ventured into the swampy area, he could see no sight or sound of the little girl. In his frenzied panic, he called out her name, "Liesel! Liesel! Liesel!" and swore blind that the disembodied echo of her name was relayed back to him, as if somebody else was calling out her name. "Liesel! Liesel! Liesel!" But who? As for beyond the wild animals in this inauspicious place, there was no human to be found. It would seem that no one else had been alerted to the fact that Liesel was missing. Well, not yet, anyway. So who on earth was calling out her name? My father described this experience as the most ghost-like, airy, or haunting moment of his entire life, that sent shivers down his spine, his blood running icy cold. For indeed he was struggling to maintain his composture, as a foreboding, inauspicious feeling overcame him. In a trice he could hear the sound of treading feet moving in shallow water, which was about 6 foot deep. He glanced up to see that marching through the thick, muddy sludge with an air of nonchalant indifference, with a dead crocodile flung over his left shoulder, along with 2 dead snakes tied up together in a knot, dangling over the other, like a couple of coiled scarves, was what he could only describe as a skunk ape, for indeed it could not have been anything else. The creature spontaneously opened his mouth to repeat my father's calls. "Liesel! Liesel! Liesel!" it cried with a glint of amusement in his deep-set eyes, as if he was taunting my father, or if that was indeed not the case, he was including my father in an amused private joke, as if the name Liesel had broken the ice between them, sealed an unlikely friendship. My father couldn't decide which. This daunting, imposing creature was enormous, with powerful ape-like influences to his appearance, along with aspects to him that were profoundly human, most notably seen in his dark black leathery human-like face, with a flat aquatic nose and sloped forehead. My father described him as being covered in long dark flowing hair, towering at about 10 foot tall, built exactly like an army tank. His hair was saturated by muddy patches that clung to his coat like cracked clay. Worse still, the creature smelt rarely foul, like damp dog combined with decaying flesh. My father watched in awe as the creature gave him an amused glance, then simply trotted away, whistling to himself and intermittently calling out Liesel's name. "Liesel! Liesel!" a new sound to his vocal repertoire that he clearly appreciated. Of course, we were to find out that Liesel was nowhere near the swamp. We might have guessed as much, for it seemed that the naughty, mischievous brother of hers loved pulling stunts on his poor, gullible, easily deceived mother, who was so quick to believe the worst. The cheeky, duplicitous behaviour was not a new thing, nor was it ill-meaning, but something he delighted in. Ostensibly, that infuriating kid loved winding up his mother, and with his reprimanding dad safely out of the way, he was having a field day winding her up, for when the cat's away, the mouse most certainly play. It tickled him pink to see his mother become so frantic, and realizing that the obscure words crocodile and swamp held in themselves incredible power in pushing her right over the edge. He loved the way her furrowed brow would contort with horror, and appeared to find everything terribly funny, which might explain why in his later years he became a prominent comedian. By the time my father returned from the swamp empty-handed by this stage, there was a kaleidoscope of police cars gathering around the neighbourhood residents, while Liesel came trotting out of the opposite house, along with the alarmed neighbours, who were mortified to see a vast police presence gathering around their house, and were wondering what the fuss was all about. "What's going on?" they asked, their faces furrowing with puzzled expressions. "We've been looking for Liesel Jameson," said the sheriff. "I see she's been with you all the time. She's safe and well, I understand." "I was only showing her our new puppies," exclaimed the woman. "Pippa, my spaniel, gave birth to 7 puppies last night." "Never you mind, ma'am," came the sheriff's reassuring voice. "People get their wires crossed all the time. At least Liesel is safe. That's all that matters. Believe me, madam, This is how we like all our stories to end, on such a happy note." Mrs. Jameson ran towards Liesel. I noticed half of her dress had actually popped open. She grabbed her startled daughter so tightly. "I thought I'd lost you, Liesel. I thought I'd lost you to the crocodiles in the swamp." As to which the child answered, "I don't like crocodiles, Mummy. I like puppies, though." The sheriff raised his cowboy hat in a gesture of politeness, his face barely able to contain its broad beam. His soulful brown eyes twinkled. "That little boy of yours, Mrs. Jameson, a spirited one he is, a real prankster you've got there, shall we say, winding up not only you, but all the police to boot." "I'm so sorry, Sheriff," said Mrs. Jameson, flushing bright red. "I don't know, Sheriff. That boy of mine, oh, he'll be the death of me. He's always putting harmless snakes in my bed, winding me up like a bedside clock. I should have known the moment his dad was out the way that out would come his guileful, mischievous pranks. But this last stunt," she said, growling, "I could kill him. He made me think his own sister had gone to play with the crocodiles in the swamp. And I believed him." "You shouldn't overreact, Mrs. Jameson," laughed the sheriff. "It's your horrified reactions he loves. The scared facial expressions, the petrified screams. Those are the things that are like candy to your son. I was not unlike that myself when I was his age. I loved to scare the living daylights out of my poor mother. It was hardly a wonder that by 32 her hair went completely white on my account. I blush to think of the things I put that poor woman through. I even brought a crocodile into the house once. She screamed like a banshee. I loved every minute of it. I can't say I blame her. Even so, I'm sorry for wasting your time, Sheriff. I really am." "Don't be ridiculous, Mrs. Jameson. I'm just exceedingly happy that your daughter was playing with puppies, not crocodiles. As far as I'm concerned, having her safe back home is a job well done." To all intensive purposes, the sweet, adorable, butter-wouldn't-melt-in-your-mouth Liesel was blindly oblivious to all the mayhem she'd caused in her brief absence. "Never ever do that again," said Mrs. Jameson, pointing a warning finger at her daughter. "As your mother, I need to know exactly where you are 24/7. Do you understand? You can't just go slipping off like that without telling me where you're going. That cannot happen again." But I did. I told Bobby. I told him I was going to play with the puppies over the road. I told him to tell you." "And he told me you were playing with crocodiles. Now you are the one that needs to tell me. Do you understand?" Fast forward to later that evening. My father never ate a single thing, but sat in front of the television watching a sports game, with a glazed look on his face rather like a dead fish, that suggested that he hadn't absorbed a thing that he was watching. If you had asked him who was winning the game, he would have been completely clueless, given you a vague, dissociated look, as if he was 1,000 miles away. I watched my father chugging copious cans of beer down his throat, buckling them up in his fists, squeezing the aluminium metal tightly, then aiming them directly towards the wastepaper basket, sometimes narrowly missing, so some of the cans ricocheted, rolling back onto the pristine cream carpet, while stray droplets of beer splattered across it, speckling it in light yellow stains. "What on earth is wrong with you, Ethan Lockwood?" my mother had said, shaking her head in annoyance. "You're one hell of a lazy man. It wouldn't take much effort for you to get off your backside, would it, and walk over to the wastepaper basket? Instead, you're mooching around like a lazy sloth. Too lazy to even get up to put the can into the wastepaper basket yourself. Furthermore, if you're not going to watch the sports game, then I would very much appreciate it if we could watch something decent together for a change. A romantic movie, perhaps, would be nice." At that, my father groaned in agony, like a belligerent dog that was being informed about an up-and-coming nail-clipping that was soon to be scheduled. My father grumbled some loose words that rolled off his tongue that were barely audible. "What's that you're saying? Speak up, Ethan. I can't hear a word when you mumble like that." "I saw a skunk ape today." My mother chuckled. "You saw a skunk ape, did you? I'm sure you see many things, Ethan Lockwood, when you've had as much to drink as you've just had right now. Why, I do believe you've drunk a dozen beers, possibly more, eaten absolutely nothing. No wonder you're seeing things. Your imagination is shooting duds, dear." I was sitting at the couch at the time. enjoying the sports game, even though I was so young. But I had noticed something about my father that ruffled my feathers distinctly. He was behaving very strangely. The way he twisted the cans of beer, throwing them at the wastepaper basket. The way his attention wavered like an undulating choppy sea. The way he'd barely touched his stew and beans that night, that lay on the tray untouched. All unlikely behaviour that was decidedly uncharacteristic, unorthodox and atypical for him. I knew my father was telling the truth. I could feel the excitement welling up inside me, for over the years I'd heard mention of this elusive hairy man, or skunk-ape, so to speak. But my father, having a chance encounter with one, it didn't get better than that. "You saw a skunk-ape, Dad? Where did you see him?" "Your father didn't see anything, Howard. Look at him. He's inebriated. You can invent anything when you're drunk, just for attention." My father almost growled. "I'm not making the story up, you silly woman. When do I make stuff up like this? If I told you I saw a skunk-ape, I saw a skunk-ape. Why should you doubt my integrity? He was calling Liesel's name, if you must know, when I was out there looking for her. He heard me call her name. He mimicked my calls." "Really, is that so?" said my mother, raising a sceptical brow. "I told you, Howard, your father is well and truly bladdered. Look at him. I hardly think a skunk-ape can talk, let alone call out Liesel's name. Have you ever heard anything so ridiculous in your entire life? Your father is a complete embarrassment to himself when he drinks far too much. You mustn't listen to him, son, when he gets like this. You see what drink does to your head? It screws your mind, blurs the distinction between fact and fiction." I watched my father's square jaw stiffen, his muscles tighten, his dark brown eyes become indignant. His mouth trembled for a moment, as if he wanted to say something, but he wilfully bit his lip to restrain himself, for he knew he might regret it. He wisely understood that my mother would never believe his anomalous account, so what was the point anyway in arguing about it? After all, he'd only be ramming his head against the brick wall. A squeaky voice grasped my father's attention. The voice was mine. His brown eyes darted towards me. "What is it, Howard? What did you just say, then?" "I believe you, Dad. I believe you saw a skunk-ape. I don't care what Mum says. I know you're not drunk. I know you saw it. I believe you." My father's face visibly softened. The contours of his face relaxed. His brown eyes began to twinkle. "You believe me, son? Well, at least somebody does." I nodded. "I do." "Were you scared, Dad, when you saw the creature?" My words seemed to throw my father off course, rather like a boat at sea losing its momentum for a moment. It was as if he had not considered that very thought. "You know, son, I should have been. I should have been terrified. But I was so shocked. Caught off guard, if you like. I never considered my fear for a moment. I guess I was benumbed by my own intrigue. It must have been that. Imagine if a huge African lion for a moment just walked past us in the living room like a domestic pussycat. You'd be afraid. Of course you would be. In normal circumstances, you should be. But a lion in the house right now would be such an astonishing sight that it seems so incongruously surreal that you say to yourself, did I really see that? Surely not. You are so caught up in a befuddlement that tangles, knots your confusion, rather like a messed up piece of knitting you're trying to unravel. While your mind is processing everything, your fear is quite literally hijacked, held to ransom or suspended by your shock. It's like that, I imagine. "Why don't you go back to the swamp, Dad, where you saw the skunk-ape? Then take a picture of it, a photograph. Then, when you show it to Mum, she'll have to admit that you weren't making it up. Then she'll know you weren't drunk. It'll be evidence, clear to see." "Son, that isn't a bad idea. I'm liking your suggestion more and more." My father's inner mind was positively gleaming at the idea of wiping the smug expression off my mother's face. When he showed her the indisputable evidence that the skunk-ape was not a creature drawn up in his wild imagination from an overindulgence of beer, but this thing was indeed very real. "Can I come with you?" I piped. "Please, Dad. I really want to see the skunk-ape as well. I really do. Please don't say no." "I'm not sure it's a good idea. Those marshes are very treacherous." "Well, I'll be careful, Dad. We'll be careful. Please Please don't say no."
"Very well, son, but not a word about our secret to your mother. For if she knew in a second that I was dragging you into the heart of crocodile country, she would have my guts for garters. And I mean that literally. Forget owning a new pair of crocodile boots, son. You'll be wearing my hide instead."
"I won't say anything," I assured him. So there we were, accessing the very same marshy area that my father had frequented before. It was swampy, unwelcome terrain, but our efforts, if fruitful, would be worth our while. It was a scorcher of a day. We had barely left the house, and the searing heat was making me sweat profusely. It felt like we were in a walk-in sauna. The buzzing insects were making conditions far from agreeable, but my determination to seek out the skunk ape negated any negative considerations for the both of us. We weren't certain if we would actually see the creature again. We weren't confident about it at all. After all, sighting the skunk ape once was indeed a remarkable achievement, but twice, that would be one for the history books. My father seemed to remember the route he'd taken through the swamp, and even the shape of the cypress tree he was standing next to on the day in question when the skunk ape had so randomly, fortuitously crossed his path. It was a very distinctive tree, with several shapely branches twisting and curling around themselves. "It was here," he whispered to me. "It was exactly here where I saw it." I could see the excitement bubble over in his face like the fizz from a bottle of champagne. He was almost trembling, as arriving at the scene of the encounter had brought it all back flooding. All of a sudden we noticed 2 dead snakes tied together in a knot, hanging over a tree. "That's his work," said my father excitedly. "The way I saw him, the last time I saw him, he had 2 snakes like that slung over his shoulders. I bet he's coming back for them. He must be around here somewhere. Get your camera, son, ready. Don't forget to take a shot at the moment you see him." "What can we do to get his attention?" I asked my father. "To draw him into us? We need some kind of bait, surely." My father's face lit up like a Christmas tree, as if he suddenly had the best idea ever. He began to call Liesel's name. "Liesel! Liesel! Liesel!" For a long time there was silence beyond the trills, tweets, warbles and unidentifiable sounds of the swamp. Then we heard on the wind the sound of the name Liesel, echoing back to us. It was the most bizarre experience I've ever had. My father was absolutely right. The sound was haunting, for it seemed to almost wail. "Liesel! Liesel! Liesel!" I looked at my father, startled, the blood draining away from my face. "Did you hear that, Dad?" I said, trembling with excitement, my heart literally leaping into my throat. "Did you hear it?" "It's him," he whispered. "That's what happened to me last time. I think he's coming. Oh my God, I think he must be coming." It was in that second my mind was flooded with doubt. As if for a fleeting moment it occurred to me that me and my father could be playing with fire, or rather a reckless game of Russian roulette. What if the skunk ape became aggressive towards us? What if it was dangerous? I think my father was having the same doubtful thoughts, as waves of regret seemed to rise up in his eyes. "Son, I shouldn't have brought you here. What the heck was I thinking? And all just to prove to your sceptical mother that I saw a bloody skunk ape. Does it really matter a toss if she believes me or not? I think it doesn't." In that second we smelt a strong wet dog smell, with skunk-like undertones, that was so unpleasant it made me gag. The smell was then succeeded by a low guttural voice, calling out Liesel's name. "Liesel! Liesel!" Then we heard the sound of heavy feet treading water. At first it was a tall, dark, dense silhouette. A blob of black that you could have been forgiven for believing was a hefty tree trunk pacing through the water on its own accord, like a spectral, ghostly apparition, that rather reminded me of the moving trees in the movie of The Lord of the Rings. It looked exactly like that. By all accounts, this creature's hair was a perfect match to the bark on the trees, for indeed if he was not moving, your eyes would have failed to perceive him at all, for you would almost certainly have not known he was actually there. I stood frozen like a statue, as standing a few feet away from us was the skunk ape himself. Nothing prepared me for what I was witnessing. I didn't know what to think, as all my thoughts seemed to spiral away like the smoke from a chimney. I didn't know what to feel either, for even my vexed, confounded emotions were like a roller coaster of confused adrenaline spurts. Should I be afraid? Should I be ecstatic? Should I be wary? Should I be careful? I was none of those things, but my body was as rigidly tense and as straight as a pencil, as I gawked at the strange, anomalous creature, with gog eyes like a goldfish, for nothing prepared me for the size, smell, or even look of this thing. It was exactly as my father had described, only much bigger than I could have ever comprehended. There wasn't a shadow of a doubt in my mind that this creature was emotionally intelligent. I could witness the discernment in its eyes. The human connection was definitely apparent. I'm in no doubt that the creature was aware of his commonality and congruity between us, as much as we were with him. For a moment the creature stood there very still, observing us with a keen interest through his steely, dark, deep-set eyes. I discerned that he appeared particularly friendly towards my father, as if he had reunited with an old, long-lost friend. He looked at my dad and said, "Liesel! Liesel! Liesel!" My father replied by saying, "Liesel! Liesel! Liesel!" and they did this again and again. The skunk ape looked terribly pleased, thrilled even, and for a while my father and the skunk ape exchanged Liesel's name together as some kind of verbal connection between the two of them, which lasted for at least over 10 minutes, possibly more. In the fullness of time the skunk ape nodded. Then he turned around, when I randomly said, "Haven't you forgotten something?" My words caused the skunk ape's head to swivel around to follow my gaze. I pointed to the 2 dead snakes tied up together hanging on the tree. The skunk ape's face lit up with recognition, as if he suddenly realized he had indeed forgotten about his tasty snack. He glided towards the dead snakes. He was about to throw them onto his shoulder when a hesitancy overcame him. He scratched his head as if making a decision borne about by some internal dialogue. Then he wilfully broke off one of the snakes, handing one to my father, in a gesture of friendly generosity. My father was so humbled. He accepted the gift graciously. The skunk ape looked absolutely delighted. His eyes twinkled with pleasure. He nodded at us and then turned around and glided away. Soon his dark silhouette became lost by the swamp. "Did you see that?" piped my father excitedly. "Did you see that? The skunk ape gave me a present." I nodded excitedly. It then hit us both like a brick to the head that we'd forgotten to take any photographs of the creature. "I'm sorry, Dad. I completely forgot to take a photograph. I just think I was so stunned by what I was seeing that it didn't even cross my mind." My father chuckled. What does it matter, son? If your mother does not believe our account, we both know what we saw, son. No one can ever take that away from us." When I returned home, I couldn't help but tell my mother the exciting news. I showed her the dead snake that we'd been given as a gift by the skunk ape. I regret to say that she was far from amused, did not share in our enthusiasm. Instead, she growled at my father. "How could you take Howard into the swamps, Ethan Lockwood? What on earth were you thinking? The place is swarming with crocodiles and poisonous snakes. Anything could have happened to him." "Mum," I said, "didn't you hear what we said? We saw a skunk ape." "I don't care, Howard, if you saw a pink hippopotamus doing gymnastics on a tree, or a purple elephant doing somersaults," piped my mother. "All I care about is that you never ever go into the swamp again," she said, shaking her head of bright red curls belligerently. We were to learn after that experience that some things are indeed best left unsaid. But as I return to the beginning of my story, I don't think it was random that we met the skunk ape. Not at all. It was meant to happen to us, as nothing is as capricious and arbitrary as it may actually seem. For as it is written by the Hopi Indians, when we show respect to other living things, they will show respect to us. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I grew up in British Columbia, which is the most western province of Canada, bordered by the Pacific Ocean to the west, the Rocky Mountains and Alberta to the east, while the province extends north to the Yukon and Northwestern Territories. I was raised close to the bustling, spectacular, charming city of Nelson, BC, a city that is nestled in the Sircon Mountains on the west arm of the deep smoky grey Kootenay Lake, which when spread out under the sparkling luminescence of a bright sunny morning, transforms into the most beautiful jade green that you've ever seen in your life, that can quite literally take your breath away and leave you to conclude that we live in a shire. But the nearby Slocan River can upstage the Kootenay River any day in terms of its viridescent green hue, which simply cannot be rivalled. Nelson, BC is like a cake with many delicious flavours and distinctive unique layers that make it stand up proudly and tall in any crowd, for it oozes character and charm like the frothy cream from a chocolate eclair. Consequently, the indelible influences of a thriving French culture, along with a sizable French-speaking population, has left its poignant indelible mark on the city, where style, savoir-faire and finesse are in bountiful supply. Ostensibly it is a buzzing city that may be accused of being many things, but dull, boring, nondescript it most certainly is not. The city is teeming with locals and intrepid explorers alike, all looking to enjoy the delicious fruits of what British Columbia has to offer. Let's just say the huge drawing card for so many visitors here is to stay in an exquisite waterfront elaborate boutique hotel, or to enjoy the pleasurable benefits of the hot spring resorts here, golfing opportunities or whitewater rafting, or to engage in the glitzy sparkle of the nightlife from the exciting dance clubs, incredible theatres, musical venues, pubs, and exciting places to eat. For indeed it is a sumptuous haven for funky avant-garde and eclectic speciality shops, along with great cosmopolitan shopping opportunities. Then there are the art galleries, museums, alluring back lanes, exciting outdoor excursions of every single kind to tickle your fancies. So yes, it would seem that Nelson, BC has the quintessential marriage between the natural world and New Age sophistication blended together in a seamless duo, as if they had never ever been apart. And so, to avoid sounding like a travel brochure introducing you to the delights of Nelson, BC, let me get on with my story that will ultimately invoke in you a mixed multitude of emotions, from horror, disgust, revulsion, astonishment, awesome wonder, and joy. A perfect cacophony of inspiring flavours, shall we say, some that you may rather not taste or find very palatable, but without tasting one, you might not appreciate the significance of all the others. All the events that unfolded are a significant part of the puzzle that creates my extraordinary story, that is also very likely to bring a tear to your eye, as it does to mine every time I ever think about it. If one piece is missing of the puzzle, the whole puzzle is seriously compromised. So buckle up, enjoy the ride, and come on this adventure with me. I grew up in an old wood and stone burgundy and white Romanesque style Victorian home, with towers, torrents, domers, a pitch shingle roof, double-hung windows, and a wraparound porch. Our house was often referred to by many as the haunted house on the hill, as postulating rumours abounded that our house was some kind of portal between this world and the next. The idle speculation and conjecture had no credible credence or weighty validation, for it was all based on hearsay or idle gossip, but I could understand where those rumours came from, for our house did possess a menacing, formidable energy that was less than savoury. I never witnessed anything untoward in our home beyond the intelligible phenomenon of the physical world. To all intensive purposes, any ethereal, ghostly footsteps that trailed down the passageway at night were not of the spectral kind, and any suppressed, vanquished, or repressed cries in the darkness of this dusky night, after the sound of the grandfather clock struck the witching hour, were not uttered by disembodied voices at all. Although, believe me, there were cries, and many of them too, that filtered through the walls of our home, the woeful, sad energy ravenously sucked up by the stone and wood. Among those hushed voices were the unheard voices of an aching heart, desperate to be heard, that had so easily been abandoned and forsaken, most especially by the people that were supposed to care the most. So yes, you could say the locals were not wrong about the hauntings in our home, but they were not of the paranormal or supernatural kind, for lurking in the dark shadows, stalking his prey with an insatiable, ravenous and obscene appetite, was a predator of note, whom under the cover of this murky twilight, with the curtains drawn and the light switched off, would undauntedly cautiously move through the house in pursuit of his quarry. I lived in this historic residence with both my parents and my younger brother Carlson. Our freakishly outer-worldly house was situated on a hill with a scattering of fruit trees in our yard, the scant remnants of the old orchards that used to grace the foothills of Nelson, BC. Black bears were a constant welcome visitor to our property, feasting on all the fallen hazelnuts and fruit that decadently graced the earthen ground so generously, with a feast of edible delights. So forget leaving bin bags out there or even a bird feeder. With those bears around, that was never ever going to happen. But despite the downsides of their visits, they were so cute and comical to watch, but they most certainly ramshackled everything. I wish I could say I grew up in a happy home. After all, with such exquisite, prepossessing, unabashful scenery surrounding us at every turn, you would expect it to unequivocally complement and enhance the quality of our lives. This, I regret to say, was certainly not the case. It bears a remarkable, striking commonality with social media platforms today, where celebrities are notorious for ingeniously parading their lives like dirty laundry in front of their admiring, adoring fans. Their laundry appears to morph into fabulous, enviable, glittering pieces of jewellery that others so wish they owned, not really knowing that the sparkling jewels in question were really just pieces of shattered glass all along. For the false visual impressions, incredible holidays abroad, happy faces, bountiful laughter, all masked a vacuous emptiness, while the vast enviable treasure that made you green at the gills was in fact only an empty box that contained nothing at all. For we live in a deceptively enticing world, where the glitzy appearances of others are not all as they seem. It was certainly that case for my life, for on the surface to the outside or casual observer, we seemed to have everything. In truth, we had nothing at all. Absolutely nothing. Even from a very young age, I knew instinctively that something was terribly wrong with my father, as his behaviour towards us was peculiarly strange, so much so that I could never put a finger on it. He was always the first eager beaver father to arrive at the school gate to pick us up, seemingly itching at the seams to assert his audacious, flagrant friendliness towards my brother's friends, with a little too much enthusiasm for my liking. "And how are you, Johnny, today?" he would say, rubbing one of the boys' heads of bouncy brown hair. "Get up to any mischief?" he would tease affectionately. "Of course not, Mr. Blanchard. I'm always a good boy." My brother's friends all thought my dad was remarkably cool. Yet when it came to my own girlfriends, my father never so much as gave them a passing glance, or even a friendly, lingering nod. You could have probably put a bucket of mud on one of their heads, and he would have been none the wiser about it. My father's fixation was literally on the young boys, like a stationary telescope on the high seas, focused on one angle only. I would often follow my father's impassionate gaze, see his lascivious eyes focusing on a young blonde boy. Always a boy, it would seem, that was a tad feminine, rather pretty, very innocent. He reminded me of a leopard, as his salacious gaze would linger over the boy for far too long, uncomfortably long, that even I would flush with embarrassment on his account. Ostensibly it bothered me that he was so different to the other fathers at the school gate, less friendly, more guarded, very wary towards other adults. You're supposed to grow up idolizing your father, looking at him through rose-coloured glasses, but I always knew and sensed something was amiss with my own. I had seen how my friends' fathers interacted with their own children, with hearts worn on their sleeves, with a warm friendliness, complemented by protective paternal instincts, offering always wise guidance and instruction to them. How I envied those relationships. Why could my father not be normal like one of them, I would wonder? In those days I was a light sleeper, would awaken regularly to the sound of feet stealthily creeping across the passage floor, trying their damnedest to remain hushed, but failing abysmally in their approach. It would be about midnight when the tick-tocking grandfather clock struck the hour with a resounding high-pitched chime. I was always awoken with a start, jumping out of my skin like a frightened cat from a bathtub of ice-cold water. The heavy chime shook me out of my slumber so violently that my awareness was heightened. I'm afraid any pit-patter of footsteps on those old inlaid planks of mixed Brazilian cherry and walnut flooring could be easily discerned, not easily suppressed or subdued by any manner of means. I could hear the creaks, the groans, the clacks. I would watch my father clad in his pinstripe pyjamas, swathed in his blue sleeping gown and slippers, waver outside my brother's door, expressing a level of hesitancy as to whether he should enter or not. His fingers would tremble and twitch on the doorknob. Then he would twist the handle open, ever so slowly, at first with reluctance, followed by an assertive boldness, as his confidence escalated like the flames on a gas hob. Even before he entered the bedroom, he would clandestinely look up and down the passageway, furtively, as if he was afraid that someone had actually seen him coming. I would be there, hiding behind a tall spider plant. I would remain so very still, so inconspicuous, barely even drawing breath, so he never ever saw me. Slowly but surely he would discreetly push the door inwards, then close it silently behind him, so you could hear a little click. Then a key would turn in the lock, so that my father had locked himself in my brother's bedroom. He would stay in there for over 20 minutes. Then I would see him covertly sneaking away again, always wearing a guilty I shouldn't have done that look on his face, that I could see so clearly, as the soft pale landing light was always kept on during the night. I was about 12 at the time, my brother only 10. I couldn't fathom what my father was doing visiting my brother in the middle of the night, when he could see him during the full light of the day. Why all this duplicitous secrecy? Did my mother even know about this, I wondered? My innocent, naive mind could not comprehend what he was up to, but I was instinctive enough to sense that something was intrinsically wrong. I first broached the subject with my brother, with a straight in-your-face question, with no frills or double meanings attached to my words. "Why does Dad visit you during the night?" I asked, at which my brother's expression went from a flushed pink colour to a pale white, as the colour drained from his face. His blue eyes became fearful. "How do you know?" he whispered. "I saw him," I said. "I saw him sneak into your room. What does he want?" "Irma, you can't tell anybody about this. Dad says if I tell anyone, I'll get into big trouble. Big trouble." I tried to get more out of my brother, but he was unrelentingly clamming up like a mussel in a shell, refusing to say a single word. I then propounded the subject with my mother. "Mummy, why does Daddy always visit Carson during the night when the clock strikes midnight?" My mother became incensed with me, as if I'd said something terrible. "Now don't you go talking about your father like that, Irma. He's a good man," she said, as if trying to convince herself of this very fact. "A very good man indeed," she insisted. "You can't go slamming him down with such outrageous accusations, Irma. You should be ashamed of yourself." Accusations, I wondered. What on earth was she talking about? I wasn't accusing anyone of anything. I was asking my mother a simple question, but she had just snapped my head off. I noticed in the days and weeks that passed, my brother was changing. He was not the fun-loving brother I'd always known before, but became nervous and apprehensive, rather like a crystal-clear watercourse becoming infested with algae. Even at dinner-time he always wittingly avoided my father's gaze, keeping his eyes strategically fixed on his dinner plate and switching off the conversation like a control on a radio station. He was always disengaged, detached, indifferent. "Carlson," my mother would pipe, "for goodness sake, stop playing with your peas. We're not in a bowling alley. If you don't want to eat them, put them to one side of your plate. I just can't abide people fiddling with their food. Are you not going to tell me and your father what you did at school today?" "We had a test in math today," my brother would say, his words so flat they would make a pencil look crooked. "Well, how did you do then, sweetheart?" "I think I did all right," he would say, remaining resolutely aloof. "Good! I'm so glad to hear it. After all, you need excellent grades if you want to get into medical school, don't you?" "I don't want to go to medical school," my brother would snap. "I'm going to be an artist." "Well, that's all well and good, sweetheart. It's only famous artists that actually make big money. I doubt you're going to be famous. It's only that 2% that make it really big. It's rather like winning the lottery. Luck plays an intrinsic part. You should focus your attentions on a lucrative career. You could become a plastic surgeon one day. They make lots and lots of money enhancing people's assets and appearances. You could apply your creativity there. Make a fortune out of people's vanity. It's a huge, thriving business. Nothing to be sniffed at, dear. Think about it. Most plastic surgeons live in sprawling mansions, own fancy yachts, have amazing holidays abroad. That could be you. Much better than being an artist any day of the week." What's his name? That Picasso guy? Oh, he didn't make it big until long after he'd popped his clogs. I mean, you don't want that to happen to you. I don't want to be a doctor or a surgeon, my brother growled. I want to be an artist. My mother wilfully ignored my brother's belligerence, turning her attention directly on me. What about you, Irma? Did you have a good day today? I would wrinkle up my nose in disgust. It was all right, I'd say. Good, I'm glad to hear it, sweetheart. One day I decided to hide in my brother's closet. I was determined to see what my father got up to on his nightly visitations to my brother's bedroom. What I was to uncover would send my blood running cold. For I was to learn that my lecherous father was the most despicable monster of the worst possible kind. I could hear beyond the soft snores of my brother the door handle turn, click open, the door open and then close behind itself, the key turning in the lock, followed by my father's footsteps padding towards my brother's bed. "Carlson, are you awake?" My brother did not answer. I'm almost certain he was pretending to be asleep. Who could blame him? My father wasn't easily put off. "Quit the play acting, Carlson. Wake up. I know you're not asleep. You're not fooling anyone, least of all me." "I want to sleep, Dad. Please go away. I'm tired." "Don't push me away, son. Wake up. Let's have some fun together, shall we?" "I don't want to, Dad," came the muffled voice of my brother. Please don't make me. I've got a headache. I don't feel too good." "You'll do as I say, son. You wouldn't want your mother to find out what you get up to, would you?" "All right," my brother groaned, "but please make it quick. I'm very tired." I could hear my father grunting as he straddled my helpless brother like a lion pouncing upon his prey. I swung open the closet door to find my father in a very compromising position. I will spare you the graphic, unsightly details, but know this, you can't unsee what I witnessed then. For I realized my salacious, licentious father was a monster of the worst, most deplorable kind. I despised everything he was doing to my poor brother. He was supposed to be my brother's protector, but he was his abuser, who cared not about his welfare, but only about titillating his shameless, profane and obscene fantasies. I began to hit my father hundreds of times, over and over again. How could you? How could you do that? How could you do that? "What are you doing here, Irma?" he barked. "Get back to bed now. If you tell your mother what you've seen tonight, you'll be in serious trouble. Do you understand?" I nodded, dashing out of my brother's room, the tears spilling down my face, for my heart was broken like a chicken's egg. For seeing my father abuse my brother like this hit me like a brick to the head. My father was undeniably a paedophile. I'd heard about such people before. It made absolute sense to me now. Fully explained the sneaking into my brother's room at ungodly hours of the night, and the constant ogling of young boys at the school gate. I was sobbing into my pillow, that was now completely saturated by the deluge of my own tears, when I heard my father enter my bedroom. His eyes looked scared. He was actually trembling. "Irma, you're not going to breathe a word about what you witnessed tonight. This is strictly between me and your brother. It's no one else's business. Do you understand?" "But you're hurting Carlton," I blubbered. "He doesn't want you to do what you're doing to him." "That's where you're wrong, Irma," said my father. It was after I had done a great deal of research on the subject of paedophilia that I was able to assure my brother Carlson that my father's immoral, debaucherous behaviour was not normal, but morally wrong and reprehensible. I also managed to persuade him that he wasn't to blame for what had transpired between the two of them, as my father had been the nefarious instigator of those wanton, dark practices. Me and my brother considered all our options. Should we run away from home together? At first the idea seemed promising, although where would we go? We hardly wanted to end up on the streets in a worse state than we were now. You saw people like that everywhere, high on drugs, inebriated by alcohol, caught up in prostitution. So we knew that that was not a viable option for us, for if we went to social services, we could invariably end up being placed in foster care. We'd both heard negative stories about children running away from abusive environments, so we didn't want that for ourselves. We also knew that telling my mother about our father's insidious, scabrous behaviour would be like hitting our heads against a brick wall. We both secretly suspected she already knew about my father's nighttime visitations to my brother's bedroom. She had conveniently just turned a blind eye. So turning to her for help would be like asking a barnacle to shift off a turtle's shell. It wasn't going to happen. Then there was the police, and that didn't sit well with us either. We were sure the social services would invariably end up getting involved somewhere down the line, and that was not good news. We trusted the social services about as much as we would our heads in an alligator's mouth. It was then that I had the most marvellous idea.
"Carlton, you can hide out in the old barn. You remember the one in the woods? I'll bring you all the food you need. Mum and Dad will never know you're there. I'll bring you books to read, stuff like that. You can paint to your heart's content in there."
The old barn or outbuilding, whatever you want to call it, held many treasured memories of our early life playing in the woods together. It was situated in a densely forested area, not far away from our home. I imagine its former owners in bygone years had possibly used it for storage purposes. It was in remarkably good condition, seamlessly hidden away in the heart of the colourful ribbon of deciduous trees such as birch and aspen, along with conifers like cedars, hemlocks and ponderosa pines. It would be the last place in the entire world my parents would ever consider looking for my brother, the quintessential inconspicuous hiding spot. So our plan rolled into action as we began to make the barn cosy and comfortable, with blankets, sleeping bags, a kerosene lamp, an old mattress, along with my brother's easel, canvases and paints. Before long, after a great deal of cleaning and sweeping, it looked halfway decent. We even cleared out the old fireplace, packing it with wood. The barn had been superbly built, with 100-year-old timber beams, so there were no leaks in the roof. I knew my brother would be safe and warm in there, and that was all that mattered in my humble opinion. My brother had left a little note in his bedroom which read, "Sorry, Dad. I had to go. I'm not coming back. If you come after me, I'll tell the police about everything you did. Carlton." I kid you not that after my father found the note in my brother's bedroom, he didn't call the police, as any normal father would have done, for he wore the guilt on his face like an extra item of clothing on his body. My father seemed very scared, rather like a deer caught up in headlights, so he queried not Carlton's absence from our home. When my mother even mentioned going to the police to file a missing persons report, he barked at her like an aggressive bull terrier, and she shrank in the corners, so she shut up and said nothing. Even the school was informed that Carlton had gone to Ireland to live with his grandmother. No one batted an eyelid or even raised a quizzical brow. This is Carlton's side of the story. People always talk about the monsters that lurk in the woods. They fail to tell you about the ones living under your own roof. Those are the worst monsters of all, as they operate with stealth and cunning, using the dark shadows of the night to conceal their treacherous, insidious crimes. My father was one of those monsters. At least I would credit an angry bear, or a ferocious mountain lion, or even a snapping crocodile as having more integrity than my own father. For if they desire to eat you, it will be plain to see. My father hid his nefarious intentions behind the veneer of a congenial face, but in his heart a darkness prevailed that was so vulgar it was oppressive. I was exceedingly blessed to have such a discerning sister like Irma, who enabled me to escape my father's treacherous clutches, opening my eyes to what he was doing to me, showing me that it was morally wrong and not my fault. I was terrified of my father, loathing, despising, hating him with every fibre of my being. I remember when I moved into that barn for the first time in my life, even though I was young, I felt happy, truly, truly happy. I didn't even miss school, as since I was knee-high to a grasshopper, my passion has always been art. So I knew I could paint, paint and paint to my heart's content, and there was nothing I would rather have done. When I grew up, I would become an artist, despite my mother's protests. It was a no-brainer for me. I did sometimes take a bus into the city, wander around art galleries to get inspirational ideas. I was lucky as my grandmother, who lived in Ireland, placed large chunks of money into our accounts for birthdays and Christmases, so I could buy anything I needed, including materials for my artwork. I knew that the police were not looking for me, nor had any missing persons report been filed, so I felt remarkably safe. Every day I would sit in the wooded area with my easel and paint. I loved to paint all the trees in the forest or anything in nature that grabbed my attention, like a squirrel or a chipmunk or even a fox, and even the flowers that festooned the hillsides with fabulous spring showings of sweet peas, chicory, Indian paintbrush and mullein, were also an incredible delight to transfer onto an artist's canvas. One day as I was painting, I heard a very strange, peculiar sound. I could hear heavy bipedal feet moving stealthily as they crunched twigs, leaves, and forest debris beneath heavy soles. I became naturally apprehensive, fearing that my father might have cottoned on to my whereabouts. I looked around pensively, my restless paintbrush twitching nervously in my hand. Then I saw her. She was peering at me through the trees behind a lacy curtain of pretty foliage, unable to disguise her curiosity, as she seemed interested in what I was doing. It was then that I realized that this anomalous creature was a Bigfoot. I was absolutely stunned, for never in my wildest dreams had I expected to encounter such an outlandish creature, up so close and personal. I've known about Bigfoot all my life, for indeed stories about their presence in British Columbia are rife. Many believe the cryptozoologist's theory that these creatures are apes is completely off the mark. They are right, these creatures are not apes by any manner of means. Instead, many people here believe a Bigfoot is another species of human with some innate supernatural abilities. In my opinion, they're onto the money there. As the Bigfoot stood there watching me, her energy was so gentle, so soft, so kind, so serene, so peaceful. I think she might have been sheepishly observing me for many days, weeks even, as indeed there had been anguished, vacillating times that I'd been almost certain I was being watched. I had put those incongruous, nonsensical feelings down to being over-neurotic on my part, about my father being hot on my trail. Now she was showing herself to me, as if I had sequentially earned her trust for this poignant reveal. It was a privilege to meet her. I assure you there was no part of me that was even a teensy-weensy bit afraid of her, for she candidly wore her heart on her sleeve, as though her thoughts were almost transparent. Granted, the sizable creature with her pyramid-shaped head, human face, deep-set dark eyes, was exceedingly tall. She was about 8 foot, 3 foot wide across the shoulders, and possibly about 700 pounds. But there are no words to describe how humongous she was in size. But she was a gentle giant, with not a malevolent, vicious bone in her entire body. She was swathed in long flowing auburn-coloured hair. There was scanter under her arms and her knees, and the area on the lower legs where her arms brush against her body. I will profess that she was a very powerful, intimidating creature, but nonetheless I knew I had nothing to fear. The Bigfoot, with her delightful heart-shaped feminine face, high cheekbones and deeply furrowed forehead, stood still watching me paint for a few days, keeping a safe distance from me, as if testing the water before deciding to actually take the plunge. I felt as if she was reading me rather like a book. I now realize that she was absolutely telepathic. So it seems the indigenous people of British Columbia are absolutely right. Bigfoots have superior powers beyond that of our own. I remember one day I was thinking that I wished she'd come closer to me. In a trice, after those thoughts floated in my mind, she perceived them, as if I'd spoken them directly to her. She promptly glided to my side, as if to say, "At last you've invited me into your space. I've been waiting for you to ask me." I was soon to realize that Bigfoots are very big on space, boundaries, and territorial markers. Before long, I'd given the Bigfoot a canvas and was showing her how to paint. I'll never forget the thrilled expression in those dark eyes of hers as she proceeded to paint. She marvelled at the paint colours, when how you mixed them together you could create new colours. She loved using her fingers to work the paint together, instead of using a brush. The first thing she painted was a red maple tree. I hadn't expected her first attempts to be so startlingly lifelike, but she was a natural-born artist. I was flummoxed for her understanding of the natural world. She understood the concepts of art, from shape, texture, light shading, stuff like that people tend to need to learn from an art teacher, but she understood those concepts as if they were ingrained in her psyche. Over the next few weeks I would see the creature on and off pretty regularly. We developed a close, unlikely friendship. She always brought a smile to my face, for she loved mimicking my facial expressions. We would eat together, but food of the human kind. She offered me a piece of dead squirrel from time to time. I always refused her offerings. We would talk to each other telepathically. I struggled with communicating in such an absurd way in the beginning, but I soon began to trust the voice in my mind. When she wasn't around, I rarely missed her, for she had wormed her way into my heart. Her name was Kamama, which she told me meant butterfly. I was to learn that there is a Cherokee name exactly the same with the same meaning. So does Bigfoot have some connection to the Cherokee Nation, I wonder? She told me she was only passing through the area and would not be there for very long, as before she settled down with a partner, she was desirous to do a little travelling. Something her kind always invariably did while they were young, as when they got older, they had to take much more responsibilities in raising their own kids, where family members would also take turns in child-minding duties. She was very glad her parents had chosen a suitable partner for her, as her kind are monogamous and stay together for life, as often the partners are selected by both parents. By all accounts, she thought he was an attractive-looking male, whom she described as having gentle, soulful eyes. I always look at the eyes, she told me, into the depths of them. You can see the heart of a man. I was to learn his name was Atchie, which is Cherokee for woods. She liked Atchie very much, because he wasn't too full of himself, as some of those male suitors tend to be, who were very big on showing off, flaunting their assets and thumping their chests wildly to extract as much female attention as possible. She did say that some young, unattached Bigfoot males could be very egotistical, big-headed and dominating. Her parents had wanted her to partner up with a young Bigfoot called Jitsu, which means trickster rabbit in Cherokee. She told her parents she didn't like him at all. He was cantankerous, grumpy, very noisy when he ate his food, when he slashed his jaws together with a horrible crunching sound that she simply couldn't abide. Worse still, he was never inclined to share, and had been known to hide berries and nuts from his own family members so he could eat them all by himself in secret. Furthermore, she had seen Jitsu sniffing around her younger cousin, and that had really turned her blood cold. She told me that generations of her kind had learnt not to trust people, for in their minds they hid too many secrets from each other, which meant they couldn't be trusted. She did believe some people were intrinsically good, and those were the kind that her people were inclined to help. She was surprised, though, that people weren't telepathic, but she said she thought it was a good thing that they weren't, as they might be horrified to learn what the other was really thinking about them. She did say that the advantages of being telepathic is that you could literally discern between a good heart and a rotten one at just a mere glance, for even the energy field surrounding a human would confirm to you what he was actually about. The red energy fields you needed to watch like a hawk, as those people were spiritually disconnected to the natural world, were impulsive, hot-headed, and exceedingly arrogant. She asked me in my mind why I was staying in the woods, and I told her all about my father, what he'd done to me. She was mortified, nonplussed, astounded. "He's got a black heart. He needs to be eliminated," she told me. "All rotten fruit needs throwing out, or it contaminates the barrel and spoils everything." It was in late summer, when my sister ventured into the woods to drop off some food for me, that I realised to my horror that she hadn't been as careful as she could have been, for she was not alone. Unbeknownst to her, my suspicious father had cottoned on to her frequent trips to the woods, and noticed that the food seemed to be leaping off the shelves of the pantry at an alarming rate. None of that had escaped his attention. He figured out my sister was hiding something, so surreptitiously followed her into the woods, shadowing her every move. "Now, isn't this very nice and cosy?" said my father, his gravelly voice booming from behind a tree. He walked brazenly forward, past my sister, facing me with indignant eyes as deadly as a black panther. "I might have known you were here. Now you get back home at once. You've got some explaining to do, young man. You've been gone for a very long time." "He's not coming home, Dad," my sister had piped. "Otherwise we'll both go to the police. We'll tell them everything you did. They'll lock you up for 100 years. Throw away the key. You'll get exactly what's coming to you." As this was all transpiring, I could see Kamara watching me from the tree line. We'd recently only just shared a couple of sandwiches together. I'm in no doubt she could read my discomposed body language, and discern the terror in my eyes as my father grabbed me by the back of my neck collar, pushing me fiercely down the path. "You come home now." Kamara grabbed my father around the waist, turning him upside down so his head dangled only yards above the ground. She whacked his head against a tree so hard that his head almost flew off the neck. I knew at once that he was dead. I wish I could say I felt regret or sadness, but I just felt relief, the kind of relief you get when you swat a blood-sucking leech off your skin. Kamara looked at me sadly. Her warm eyes told me, "He was a bad apple. He needed to go. I need to go also, for your kind will be sniffing around here sooner or later, so I need to get out of here fast. I need to return home. It's possibly time I did anyway, but I've enjoyed knowing you." She looked at me and said,
I love you, Carlton. Your heart is mine forever. You'll be my friend for lifetimes to come, for our life paths are definitely interlinked. Know this, young man. Whenever you see me in your mind's eye, trust the image you see. Know that I've popped in to say hello. Know that I've popped in to send you my love. I will always be there with you, forever and ever, even if we never lay eyes on each other again in this lifetime. Remember, I will never, ever leave your side. To cut a long story short, I lived the rest of my youth with my sister Irma, being raised by my mother, who to this day has never admitted to my father's predatory nature, but I know she knew about it. Me and Irma never regretted Kamara eliminating my father from our lives, as he really was a bad apple. My father's body was found in the woods deceased. It was believed he was attacked by a bear. For many years I never told people the truth about what happened to him. I never will. In this anomalous forum, why not? I just want people to know that before you judge a predatory territorial Bigfoot so stiffly, there are human predators, hundreds and hundreds of them out there, preying on young children like my father preyed on me. In my book, the human predator can be the worst kind of all. As for Kamara, I miss her terribly. She is one of the most awesome beings I've ever been privileged enough to know. She was very human. I feel honoured that she touched my life so richly. As she promised, she still pops into my mind at least twice a day. I know it's her checking in on me. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. I don't think that's a good idea, Clay, said my mother, trembling, her coffee mug jiggling in her hands. I don't think you understand. I haven't seen my sister in over 6 years. It's going to be terribly awkward with her around. We weren't ever very close.
I'm leaving the ranch for 2 weeks, sweetheart. I need to feel assured that things around here will run smoothly in my absence. Your sister being here will be a huge load off my back.
You're making it sound as if I'm incapable of moving around on my broken leg. It was a horse-riding accident, for goodness sake, Clay. I'm not completely incapacitated.
Even so, you need your sister's help in managing the household while I'm away. It seems she's very agreeable to the offer. To lend a helping hand, that is.
Couldn't we just get a housekeeper for that? My mother almost begged.
No, said my father, shaking his head. We need someone closer than that. Someone who can keep an eye on you and the kids while I'm away. Help you with the grocery shopping, picking up the children from school, stuff like that.
Don't you get it, Clay Farrell? Me and my sister were never ever close. Why do you think I didn't invite her to our wedding? She's a Chicago girl through and through, a city slicker. She has no experience in country life whatsoever. You want to bring her here, Clay? Isn't that a little nonsensical of you?
It's not nonsensical, Ruby. It's a wise decision. As I've told you, you need a helping hand. Your sister Gladys is delighted to be of help. She was saying it would be very good to catch up with you for old time's sake. She hasn't seen you for a very long time. She'd like to get to know her niece and nephew a little better, who I might add she's never met.
My mother rolled her eyes.
Clay, you've only opened a whole can of worms inviting my sister to stay like this. I'm not going to pretend I'm not dreading it, because dreading it I most certainly am. After my father had evacuated the kitchen, I pounced on my mother in surprise. You have a sister, Mummy? I have an aunt. Why did you never say?
Because you didn't ask. There are some things that are best left unsaid, and your aunt is one of them.
But why? She's my aunt. Don't I have a right to get to know her better? I know all Dad's sisters, but I didn't even know you had one. Be very careful what you ask for, Pumpkin. Some packages are best left undisturbed, but your father is intent on opening this one up. Goodness only knows why. I wish he would leave well alone. The last thing we need is Gladys turning up here. But your father seems dead set on this absurd idea of his. And once he has a bee in his bonnet about something, well, wild horses won't stop him in his endeavours. I didn't know what to think. I was 12 years old at the time. My mother was acting seriously weird. I mean, why was she so adverse to seeing her sister again, who she hadn't crossed paths with for over 6 long years? You would think that after her dreadful riding accident, this would be the perfect excuse for her to get reacquainted with her after so long. Yet I had seen a hurt in my mother's eyes, a forgotten pain that had come bounding back into her life like a lost dog, but one she was not eager to become reacquainted with. I might have been many things, young, naive, and very ignorant at the time, but one thing I knew without a shadow of a doubt was that my mother's mysterious sister had indeed been a root cause of a tortuous pain in her life that she had wilfully chosen to ignore. I had noticed the stray tear gliding down her cheek, which she had quickly abated by shoving it away with the wipe of her long-sleeved top. My mother had said that my father was opening a can of worms. I sensed that she might be right about that. After all, there had to be a very good reason why my mother had fallen out with her sister in the first place. I seriously hoped in my heart that it would not happen with me and my older brother Tyler. I couldn't imagine not seeing him for 6 years. That in itself would have been tortuous for me. My family lived on a cattle ranch in Colorado, an arrestingly beautiful part of the world that would quite literally take your breath away. Even when we returned from the grocery store or home from school, I'd often glance out of the passenger side window of my mother's truck, staring in awe at the beguiling scenery, hardly daring to believe that we owned it all. It would seem that underneath the vast expanse of the cobalt blue sky was a sprawling oasis of luxuriant green rolling hills, with a backdrop of mountainous views that rose up into the sky like masterful pyramids, smudging the landscape in hazy blurs of purples, greens, and blues. You could be forgiven for thinking you were visiting a very well-maintained, beautiful park, as everything was so vibrant, so lush, so electric green, with a huge lake that shimmered like a silvery jewel under the noonday sun, reflecting the glorious trees, the sky, the clouds on its rippling surface. Then there were trees, large, small, medium-sized, gathered together in huge clusters like celestial beings, offering shade and cover for the cattle and people alike. On every side we had stylized fields that were gracefully hemmed in with white picket fencing. I loved how the white fencing would accentuate the rich greens of the vibrant landscape. I remember the morning when Gladys, my mother's sister, arrived at our ranch, with a poignant crystal-clear clarity that has never left me, after my dad had left for his 2-week trip abroad, a gathering of cattle ranchers from all over the globe, getting together to discuss business, float around new ingenious ideas. In a trice a taxi drove down our long driveway, grinding to a swift halt, as a splattering of pebbles was spat out from beneath the hardened bonnet, like the popcorn bursting from a heated pan and flying everywhere. I could see the vehicle parking outside our ranch-style home, hear the handbrake being pulled up, the engine switched off. All was still for a moment, and then the silence was broken by a flurry of swift, efficient movements. I could see a woman with long, straight, bottle-blonde hair getting out of the taxi and moving towards the trunk, where the taxi driver hauled out a very sizable suitcase. "So this is all you've got, miss, is it?" he asked, hauling out the suitcase for her, that looked like it was bursting at the seams and about to explode in any given minute, as if she'd brought along everything, including the kitchen sink. She didn't know the meaning of travelling light, that was for sure. "That's it," came the quick response. "Thank you," she said, opening her purse and throwing the driver a big fat tip, which he took gratefully, nodded, and then turned away. "Enjoy your stay here in Colorado, ma'am. This is some fine ranch you've got here. Wouldn't mind staying here myself." I could hear the truck door slam behind itself, an engine starting up, the taxi driving away down the long ribbon of asphalt that was fringed by a sea of pebbles that made up our driveway, until the hum of the engine had all but dissipated into the ether, to be heard no more. For a moment the woman stood still, her cornflower blue eyes covered by a pair of very glamorous Gucci sunglasses that seemed to glide over the house with an open curiosity. But I did sense that there was a troubled nervousness to her gait, rather like a reluctant horse being broken in for the first time, and not knowing exactly what to expect, or whether to even trust the daunting, intimidating process in the first place. This was my mother's sister Gladys. I could hardly believe it. They were as different as day as tonight, on first impressions, that is. I could see that she was dressed like a fashion-conscious city slicker, as everything about her was so perfectly manicured,
without a single hair out of place, like one of those fancy hedges you get in ornate Japanese gardens, being shaped within an inch of their lives. You could see that she was out of place on a Colorado ranch, rather like a rose in a desert. This very well made-up young woman that looked like she was dolled up to the nines, as if she was auditioning for a part in Days of Our Lives. She was wearing a very glamorous glitzy denim jacket that twinkled, glittered and sparkled from the diamante patterns that swathed the blue fabric in a stylized design of silvery diamonds. She was wearing an expensive pair of black leather pants, a pair of very ornate cowgirl boots, with curved patterns of flowers and leaves interspersed into the leather in varying shades of reds, browns and blues. Granted, she was trying to look like a cowgirl, but her efforts, although admirable, were way off the mark. You could see at a single glance the girl had never been on a ranch a single day in her life, a true fish out of water, so to speak. The woman seemed apprehensive as she dragged her Gucci suitcase by its back wheels up the steps of our wraparound porch towards the front door. My mother's face was unsmiling. She was a fresh picture of simplicity, decked out in her blue plaid shirt and jeans, while clutching the crutch in her hand to support her broken leg. You might have expected warm welcomes, tears, hugs, but that was not what I witnessed. It was like the moment Gladys entered our house, so did a chilly cold breeze along with her. Yet this was a fine day for Colorado, warm, friendly, inviting, but it felt anything but, as the tension in the house was almost electric. "It was good of you to come," said my mother stiffly. Her cold words were almost icy. "It's the least I could do, sis, in the circumstances. I heard about your nasty accident on that horse of yours. You poor, poor thing. You took some knocking there. When Clay told me he was going away for 2 weeks, needed someone to take care of you and the kids, I jumped at the offer, as after all, what are sisters for? I knew you needed my help. So here I am, sis. It's been so long, far too long." "Not long enough," said my mother. Her words were tight, emotionless, guarded. "I don't know why Clay had to phone you. I can manage perfectly well on my own, without any help." Gladys ignored my mother's remarks, as her blue eyes focused on me and then my brother Tyler, who was standing in the entrance hall, watching her, as if observing an exotic new species of animal at the zoo. For indeed my mother's sister, with her high fashion ensemble, stood out like a sore thumb on a Colorado ranch, but not in a bad way necessarily. She was just different. It would take a while for her to grow on us, or for us to adjust to this colourful new character in our lives, so to speak. "So this must be my niece, am I right?" said Gladys, turning her attention onto me, studying me through keen, curious eyes. I nodded. "I'm Juniper," I told her. "That's my brother Tyler." "Juniper? I love the name. It's so unusual." "My dad chose it," I told her. "He says juniper trees are very, very special. The Native Americans saw them as sacred. That's why he calls me Juniper." "Well, that makes sense," said Gladys. "After all, you're a very special girl, aren't you?" I flushed with delight at the compliment. Maybe my mother's sister wasn't so bad after all. Nonetheless, as nice as Gladys seemed on the surface, I didn't enjoy or relish having her awkward intrusion in our lives. It felt as if dark thunderclouds hung around our home like a rumbling distant storm looming on the horizon, threatening to rain down some alarming lightning strikes in any given moment. Even my brother, who was not the most perceptive person at the best of times, was appalled by the tension that accumulated in our home. "Something happened between the two of them," he said. "Something bad, rarely bad. I've never seen Mum so clammed up and edgy before. Her sister, well, that woman looks as comfortable as a giraffe would be in a horse stable. This was a crazy idea of Dad's to bring those two together again. Forget the Second World War, sis. I can feel World War III brewing. It's starting up in our own home." It was certainly true. It would seem the more my mother and her sister were in each other's company, the worse things became, as the congested, rising negative energy built up like a pressure cooker in our home. I knew it would only be a matter of time before those two had it out with each other. Perhaps it would be a good thing in coming, I thought. Clear the air after a heavy storm. A fresh start, I hoped. In her own way, my aunt had been a huge help, as her mobility meant that she was picking up groceries, collecting us from school, helping my mother out wherever possible, even in the kitchen, by assisting her in cooking evening meals. The two sisters barely said a word to each other, just nodded and said yes or no. It really was as basic as that. Me and my brother knew absolutely nothing about my aunt or her illustrious city life in Chicago. We couldn't comprehend why she was choosing to stay with us at all, in such an unwelcome, hostile and unconvivial atmosphere. My mother was making it clearly apparent that Gladys was not welcome. I know if I'd been wearing her shoes, I would have hightailed it from our ranch a long time ago, but I must say the tenacity of Gladys was remarkable. Dinner was the worst part of the day, when we gathered together to eat, engaging in a few social niceties, with the usual warm sunshine and laughter we were used to not apparent. You could have cut the silence with a knife, as no one said a word around the table. All you could hear was the clitter-clatter of cutlery as we ate our food in silence. One evening my brother broke the awkwardness. "I see you're not married, Aunt Gladys. I couldn't help but notice you don't have a wedding band or an engagement ring." My aunt flushed, while my mother regarded her through dagger-sharp eyes. If looks could kill, my mother was wearing that look. "Never did meet the right man, Tyler. People say it's easy finding love, but I've tried everything. Blind dates, you name it. I've never met the right one. It's a minefield out there finding that nugget of gold, so to speak, let me tell you that." "Well, don't give up. I mean, you may be old, but you're not ancient. You still have a chance. Besides, you are quite pretty, but you do wear far too much makeup. Maybe a little less might make you look more real, if you don't mind my saying so. I think you'd be better without it." "That's very reassuring, Tyler. I'll have you know I'm 37. There's life in the old dog yet. As for wearing makeup, you need all the help you can get when you reach my age, Tyler." 37, said Tyler, who was 14 at the time. "In my book, that doesn't make you very young." Later that night I woke up with a start, glancing briefly at my bedside clock. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. I could hear the sounds of raised voices coming from the kitchen. It sounded like someone was having an altercation. I knew instinctively that the pressure cooker had boiled over. My mother and Gladys were at each other's throats. This I had to see. I stealthily tiptoed towards the kitchen, hiding myself behind a high column. My mother's face was as dark as a thundercloud, as she looked at her sister with such a defiant expression of hatred on her face that was so fierce it even scared the hell out of me. The words that came out of her mouth throbbed with pain, as she stumbled and choked on them, as if even speaking them out loud was actually stinging her. Neither woman were aware I was standing there in the kitchen, watching this scene unfold. "What you did to me in here," said my mother, pointing to her guts. "You might as well have ripped my insides out. You knew he was the love of my life, but you stole him from me, like you've stolen everything else from me in my life. How could you take the one thing, Gladys, the one thing in the world from me that meant the world? How could you? How could you do that? I don't understand. I was your sister, for goodness sake. Didn't that count for anything? Isn't there a code of ethics somewhere not to try and steal your siblings' boyfriends? If there isn't, there should be. Because let me tell you, Gladys, when I saw the two of you in bed together, you might as well have plunged a knife right into my guts." "I didn't mean it," came a limp voice. I guess I was jealous. The two of you were so in love. I suppose I got carried away. It wasn't his fault. I was the one pushing. I was the one pushing the boundaries. He said he loved you, but one thing led to another. It didn't mean anything. I wanted him to see me, to look at me like he looked at you." "It didn't mean anything, did it, Gladys? You know how warped that sounds. You sounding like a soap opera. You really disgust me. But sis, if you loved him so much, why did you break up with him? You knew he wasn't interested in me. He never would have been. But after you broke up with him, he was a broken man, really broken. You let him believe that you didn't love him anymore. Now that was heartless. That was cruel. He was never the same after that. Granted, he's a married man now, 3 children, I gather, a successful Chicago entrepreneur. But you, sis, you were the love of his life, ingrained in him like the tattoo on his flesh." Right, I've heard everything now, Gladys. You think it was cruel, do you, me breaking up with Nathaniel? You think it was cruel?
You were the one, sis, that was cruel. You were the one that baited him with all that alcohol to lower his inhibitions. You were the one that willfully seduced him. You ruined our lives. You destroyed our happiness. I wasn't going to return to the man. Credit me with having some pride and self-respect, will you? He betrayed my trust. Forgiving him would have made me weak and pathetic. But you are happy now, aren't you, sis? You live on a beautiful ranch. You have a devoted husband. I can tell that Clay loves the bones off you. You have 2 incredible children. You have a phenomenal life. Why can't we just move on? Forgive. Let go of it all. I'm very happy, sis. Clay is a great husband, that's true. My 2 children are absolutely perfect. Life on the ranch is wonderful, idyllic. But Nathaniel, he was the love of my life. You took him from me. I never ever loved anyone like I loved him. I love Clay with all my heart, but no one could hold a candle to Nathaniel. I would have to live 1,000 lifetimes to meet someone like him again. For a moment the kitchen was hit violently by a cataclysmic, ominous bomb. The sound of silence. All you could hear was the ticking of the grandfather clock, which was oddly bizarre, because I'd never really noticed it before until now. Yet now I was hearing every tick, like a heartbeat in a tense situation. In a trice, breaking through the silence was a choking sound that morphed into sobbing. Gladys was crying. I love you, sis. I always have. I've missed you so much over the years. I've never forgiven myself for what I did back then. I was so jealous. You had everything that I wanted. You were the one that was pretty. You were the one that was clever. You were the one that was funny. I suppose it elevated my self-esteem to prove to myself that I could be attractive to Nathaniel. You think your apologies are going to make a jot of difference, said my mother. It's all water under the bridge now. She pulled out flowers from a vase in the kitchen and threw them at my sister. You ruined my life, sis. Isn't that enough for you? Are you happy now? At that my mother hobbled on her crutches, moved towards the kitchen door, shoving it open and venturing out into the backyard. You can't go out, cried Gladys. Your leg! What about your leg? You can't go out! Leave me alone, came my mother's strangled voice. Leave me alone, Gladys. Give me some space. I knew she wouldn't go far. I mean, how could she on that leg? I'm sure Gladys was thinking the very same thing. She'd possibly decided to give my mother the space she craved. Gladys looked up in my direction. How long have you been standing there? She asked, as she saw my small bewildered figure in pyjamas staring at her like a gog-eyed goldfish in the corner of the kitchen. Well, I heard you fighting. Gladys frowned. So you heard everything. I nodded. Look, I did a very silly thing all those years ago. I was young, foolish, naive, stupid. You can see I've really upset your poor mother. That's one of the reasons I came back. I needed to make my amends. I felt guilty for so long about all this. It's been weighing down on me so heavily. I know I can't fix things, but I can make things better. Sometimes it's all you can do, is to make things better. But you've made things worse. You've upset my mother. She was happy before you came here. But now that you're here, she's sad all the time. Gladys reached for a headlamp and jacket. Let's go and get your mother, shall we? She can't have gone far on that leg of hers. But I'm worried she might trip over something and make things 1,000 times worse for herself. Where did you think she might have gone? Well, to the woods. My mother goes to the woods. She loves it there. She goes there to think. It was exciting walking out in the night with the cold air blowing against my face under the light of a full moon, along with a kaleidoscope of silvery stars. Gladys sighed with relief. I'm so glad it's a full moon and such a bright night. At least she'll be able to see where she's going. She can't have gone very far. This is my mother's personal account. Seeing Gladys again was like opening up an old festering wound. I knew Clay was asking for trouble inviting her into our lives. I buried the memories of my past in the back of my mind like a squirrel, storing away acorns for its upcoming hibernation. I didn't want to meditate on those painful times ever again. But the moment Gladys entered the threshold of my home, haunting memories came flooding back. Her betrayal, disloyalty, jealousy, vindictive past behaviours that had blatantly robbed me of any peace. It was as if they were playing out in my life all over again. Don't get me wrong, I was a very happily married woman, who loved my husband Clay to death with all of my heart.
along with my 2 wonderful children. I had absolutely no regrets in my life, as I had to reconcile myself to the idea that sometimes the path in life leads us down a different course, and you should always embrace it, wherever it may lead. After my unexpected altercation with Gladys in the kitchen, I could feel the anger throbbing through my veins like a heated inferno, or like a volcano getting ready to spew its fudge-like molten lava over a mountain. Gladys had admitted that she was jealous and insecure at the time, that she had seduced the love of my life. Granted, she hadn't meant to hurt me, but she had. It felt like once again a sharp blade had been thrust into my guts. It felt like a fresh wound. Finally, when I could take it no more, I had flung the flowers at Gladys, making a hasty retreat from the kitchen. I knew where I was going, to my favourite sanctuary in the woods. It was about 2:30 in the morning, but I didn't care. My heightened emotions meant I needed to get away from the ranch house as fast as I could. The atmosphere in there had been claustrophobic. I felt as if I couldn't breathe, as if my lungs burned with the stinging pain of my sister's confessions. It was a bright night. At least I could see where I was going, but my physical impediment was holding me back from my mission. I needed space, fresh air, lots of it, and more than anything else in the world, I needed to be left alone to breathe, to reflect, to think. I was making quick strides as I climbed through the wicker fence through a field of grazing cattle, who looked upon me curiously as I hobbled to the far end of the field, where I squeezed myself through the fence in the open clearing that fringed the edge of the woods. I was immeasurably grateful that although the tall pyramid-shaped ponderosa pines were clustered together quite closely, there was enough space between the canopy above to allow the soft waves of gentle moonlight to dance through the trees, lighting up my path in an ethereal light. Normally I would have been intimidated, even fearful venturing into the woods alone so late in the night, or early in the morning, so to speak. Indeed, there could be no end of predators loitering around here, and with a slightly impaired leg, I could be a sitting duck for a determined mountain lion. But those fears were expunged from my mind, for my frenzied emotions and elevated sense of anger had overtaken my angst. As I moved through the trees, I could smell the delicious butterscotch fragrances of the ponderosa pines. The sweet, refreshing smell brought me a measure of comfort. I was suddenly struck by the wild revelation that there were no croaking frogs or chirping crickets gracing the night, with their usual cheerful chorus. This was decidedly odd to me. My husband had always warned me that when the forest grows quiet, a predator is most certainly around. I glanced around me nervously, as I suddenly got the overwhelming feeling that I was being watched. But by what? The first thought that came into my head was a mountain lion. They had been seen on our property before from time to time, showing a keen interest in our calves. I sensed it again and again. Something was watching me. I could feel the eyes boring into me like a hammerjack. I could see nothing at all. It was exceedingly frustrating. Then I heard something, but what I heard was strange. It sounded like someone on 2 feet was walking towards me with deliberate intent. I could hear the crunching of twigs as they snapped beneath feet. Every step they took towards me was so loud, like someone was beating a heavy drum as the forest floor almost groaned, rumbled, heaved under the substantial weight of their lumbering approach. Whatever was moving towards me, I instinctively sensed was very, very huge. You would have thought I'd have run away in horror, screamed blue murder at the top of my lungs. But I was so caught off guard, as if I'd been stunned by a stun gun. I was trying to wiggle my way out of the disorientation, like a desperate dog flung into the water, doggy-paddling it back to the shore in a terrified fog of confusion. So I just stood there still for a while, hardly daring to draw breath. My heart pounding through my chest, my knees almost buckling beneath me. I was so glad to be hanging on to my crutch for dear life, because without it I might have just collapsed then and there, on the spot. Then I saw a blurred movement, an obscure, very dense form, swaggering through the trees. The movements made the shadowy, hazy humanoid silhouette appear inebriated, like an intoxicated drunk. I could see that whoever, or whatever it was, appeared to be jiggling the tree branches up and down. Then I saw him. There are no words, for even if I looked for them I couldn't find them, for they eluded me like the string on a hot air balloon, rising up into the sky, floating far, far away. This thing, this monstrously stubby, thick tree trunk of hair stood tall, proud, majestic, lofty, like a masterful skyscraper that you can't ignore.
for its imposing presence seizes your attention, demands your respect, grabs you with a mixture of wondrous awe and extreme reservation that is driven by a compounding fear that courses through your veins like a fast train moving through a dark tunnel. He stood there so close to me, too close for comfort. I could hardly breathe, hardly draw breath. My heart jumped into my throat, my body lost its momentum like a boat on the river overloaded with people that it threatens to suddenly capsize. For indeed nothing in my wildest dreams could prepare me for what I was seeing, as even all these years after the event, I shudder at this memory. The creature was so tall, so big, so huge, so burly, built like a giant army tank in every conceivable way, covered in long flowing dark hair, but beneath the hair I got the faint glimpses of grey skin, very defined muscle mass and tension. The creature was easily 8 foot tall, maybe more. He looked to be half man and half ape, for there were parts of his appearance that were distinctly primate-like, most especially seen in the overlong arms and the pyramid-shaped head. I noticed his face was remarkably human, with a dark leathery skin that shone with a little bit of a gleam to it, a very pronounced square jawline, high cheekbones, and a discerning pair of deep-set dark eyes that stared at me with such intensity they almost bored into my soul. The creature was male without a shadow of a doubt. I could perceive that powerful male energy. On reflection, I don't think the creature was actually caught off guard seeing me, as I think he'd been spying on me moments before, but he was so intrigued and curious by me. Really curious. I think I know why he revealed himself to me. I believe he perceived the energy I was exuding that night, the emotional pain and turmoil, the sense of betrayal, hopelessness. He had perceived it all. Of that I am in no doubt. The creature could read me like a book. I'm not sure if he wanted to comfort me or not, but he stood his ground as he observed me with eyes that were remarkably kind. Unfortunately, I was the one that could not stand my ground, because I felt myself going all light-headed, and then I passed out. I think I'd fainted from the shock of seeing this anomalous creature. The next thing I knew was that the creature was hovering over me, his dark eyes frantic, his hands trying to slap my face. I think he thought I was dead. I opened my eyes to find these dark eyes staring into mine, eyes of liquid love, compassion, genuine concern. They were so close to mine that I could have stroked his face. I could hear the words soaring into my mind. "You gave me a scare. Are you all right?" The creature gave me a hand and pulled me to my feet. I pointed to my crutch. He grabbed it for me. For a second he was very still. He pointed to beyond the forest. Then I heard the sound of my daughter's voice along with Gladys calling my name. "Mum! Mum, are you there? Mum! Mum! Mum, we're looking for you. Where are you, Mum? Are you there?" "It'll be all right," came the voice in my head. "It'll work out in the end. The path was chosen before you were born. Trust it." I was startled. Had the creature really just said that to me? Surely I had not imagined it. But I was certain it wasn't my imagination. The voice that had spoken to me was very definitely male. It was different to the voice in my imagination. The creature looked at me, nodded, put a pine cone in my hand, and then glided away. I still have that pine cone today in pride of place on my mantel. What many may consider ordinary is priceless to me. "Oh, there you are," came Gladys's voice. "What induced you to come this far on that broken leg of yours? You're asking for trouble." I ran towards my daughter and then to Gladys. I cried, I've just seen a Bigfoot. I've just seen a Bigfoot. It spoke to me. It spoke to me in my mind." That all happened over 20 years ago. Does time not march on? I'm glad to say that me and Gladys finally settled our differences. I forgave her for her past indiscretions, as there is no point in holding on to bitterness. It'll eat you alive. Furthermore, I've come to realize that the Bigfoot was right. There is a chosen path for our lives. We need to embrace it and go with the flow. Granted, there are lessons to learn on life's journey. I'm glad to inform you that Gladys, who thought she was doomed to be single all her life, against all odds is now happily married with 2 teenage children of her own. She lives in Chicago. My children, being that much older, have left home and started families of their own a while back, and they're very happy. As for my relationship with my husband, I couldn't be happier. I believe despite everything, we were meant to be together. He is the quintessential love of my life. So in the end, everything worked out for the greater good, I can assure you of that. So even when it seems that your life is barely holding on by a thin silvery thread, remember the universe has you cupped graciously in the palm of her hand. Never doubt that for a fleeting second. I don't. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah, my name is Cheryl, and my story starts in the fall of 2013, when my husband Dave and I were taking a year off work, just travelling around North America for a while. My husband was involved in the construction industry and was leaving his assistant manager in charge of the whole operation while we enjoyed a very extended, long-needed holiday. We decided to just spread our wings on this wonderful open road adventure with the whole world at our feet. My husband had recently had a heart bypass, and he said he was not getting any younger and that life was for living and not for always working. You see, he came so close to losing his life on 3 separate occasions with multiple heart attacks, so he just wanted to use the time he had left for living life to the fullest. So that is what we did, and that was when the camper idea was born. We had met wonderful people during our travels and seen some marvellous scenic views that took our breath away, from beautiful natural coastline, glorious white sandy beaches, to snow-capped volcanic mountain tips, lush green valleys, rounded hills, lily-covered ponds, gushing streams, silvery lakes, and alpine forests. We had also seen so much abundant wildlife, and even had an encounter with a mountain lion that crossed our path on one occasion while driving down a large dusty road. I remember it looked directly at us, rolled back its mouth to reveal very sharp teeth, and gave us a warning growl. But we were so tickled pink to have had such an awesome sighting of such a formidable creature. My story starts when we were driving our camper van down Highway 1 from Westport, California, and admiring the ravishing views of the Lost Coast with the beautiful shapely rock formations bulging through the water's edge like great works of modern sculpture. We were glad to be travelling down this road in the fall, because it can get very vicious during stormy days in this part of the world, and believe me, you want to avoid those conditions at all costs, as some people have been swept to their deaths by punneling aggressive windstorms in the past. Also, I cannot help but think that fall is always the best time of the year, because the excessive heat of the summer has at long last retreated and been overtaken by the far kinder weather conditions, which for me is so much more preferable. Finally, we reached the last leg of Highway 1, which is where the redwood trees finally meet the coast, and then we travelled towards Leggett. Please don't quote me on my navigational skills, because they're dreadful, and my husband does the driving, but this is roughly the route I remember that we took. As we drove, we noticed that the glorious redwood trees became larger and even more imposing. Finally, we reached the town of Garberville, where we stocked up on all our essential supplies and proceeded on our journey towards our camping site. We travelled northwards towards the Avenue of the Giants and then past Humboldt Redwood State Park, which I've always wanted to visit given all the activities available to visitors in the area. We were not going to be camping there because we had heard of a remote camping ground further afield, off the beaten track, that was far more preferable because it was so close to nature and next to an idyllic lake where there were very few campers, and it was very, very beautiful there. Suddenly we found ourselves driving down this dusty red road, surrounded on either side by giant redwood trees that were so tall they towered above us with majestic trunks of brown bark covered with carpets of beautiful green moss. "It is so gorgeous here," I gasped, "and those trees are utterly extraordinary. They're so distinguished looking." Suddenly crossing the road, larger than life, was this hairy humanoid who was most definitely not a bear, although you could be forgiven for thinking so because it was covered in dark brown hair from head to toe, and it had the longest arms I have ever seen, with human-like hands. The creature turned its head and looked directly at us for a moment, and that was when we saw the bullet-shaped head and the long face, the protruding brow ridge, the flat black nose. We also noticed that the eyes were big and brown and deep set, and they stared at us only for a moment with an open curiosity. I also got the sense that it was upset that we had noticed it, and it had been discovered. It then scurried away very fast, because it really did seem to regret that it was seen by us. But this thing, the way it moved on those long agile legs, I would hazard a bet that this thing was faster than a cheetah and equally as graceful, if not more so. Soon it vanished from our sight, and you could have heard a pin drop in the car as both my husband and I assimilated what we had just seen in a long moment of deep contemplation. "What the heck was that?" asked my husband, looking horrified. "What in the world did we just see?" It almost looked like the pictures of early man, because it looked like an ape man, I suppose. I never imagined that such a creature could exist in North America, but I saw it with my very eyes. The sighting disorientated us for a long time, because for a long time our encounter with the creature was all that we could talk about. We even pulled up on the edge of the road to compose ourselves for a long while, because we could not believe what we had just seen, and we were seriously rattled by the experience. I could see my husband was physically shaken, and I was worried about his heart condition getting worse. "Calm down," I said. My husband started to breathe into a brown paper bag, and he took long breaths. Such was his shocked reaction from seeing that creature. "I feel like I'm having a panic attack," he said. "No animal has made me feel this way before. I can't stop trembling." "The creature's gone," I assured him, "and he wasn't in pursuit of us anyway. I could tell he didn't want us to see him at all." "Maybe so," said my husband, "but what the heck was it?" Before we knew it, the day had retreated. The sun had set, covering the whole valley in glorious golden pink hues, and then suddenly the night set in, and it grew very dark. We tried to locate the campground we had been looking for, but it seemed to be so elusive, just like the Scarlet Pimpernel, because it was impossible to find. I now knew we were well and truly lost, and even our GPS sent us on a wild goose chase to what can only be described as the middle of nowhere. In the end, we just gave up and decided to find a small clearing where we could park our camper van overnight, even though it might not be a legal place to park. But it was a risk worth taking, and hopefully no one would notice us, since the area seemed relatively remote. We found what seemed to be the most perfect spot to park, surrounded by the largest redwood trees I've ever seen, and they circled our van in the most perfect half-moon shape. "It's so lovely out here," I said, setting up an outside table and chairs, while my husband prepared the fire pit. I hastily prepared some Greek salad, and my husband cooked honey and mustard-flavoured chicken kebabs over the grill. It was already getting late, and I became ravenously hungry because we had barely eaten all day. Suddenly we heard a car pulling up beside our camper van, and a friendly-looking young man got out of the car, slamming the door behind him. He was wearing jeans and a white t-shirt and a dark brown cowboy hat that did give him a very sort of, cowboy-y look. "You do realise you're parked on private land," he said. I explained to him that we had lost our way to the camping ground and were just pulled over for the night, but we were willing to move away if it was an inconvenience. "Look," said the young man, rubbing his moustache in deep contemplation, "this is my father-in-law's land. One of his sons was killed in a deadly car accident 10 years ago when his car overturned during the night and crashed into that redwood tree over there," he said, pointing to the tree. "My father-in-law has turned this little clearing into a memorial for his son because it is where the accident actually happened." "What? Someone was killed right here?" I asked in horror. "It gets worse," he said. "Some people have seen Mark's ghost in this very spot you're camping, and even strange lights and orbs have been detected around here, so I thought I ought to warn you." "Oh, I do not believe in the supernatural," I said, smiling, "but we're willing to move away out of respect for the poor young man who lost his life here. What a terrible, tragic accident." "It was tragic," said the young man, looking at us with misty, clouded eyes, as if covering up some tears. "Mark was one of my best friends in the whole world. We grew up and hung out together all the time, which was where I got to meet his sister, who is now my wife." "Wow," I said, "that's some story." "I spoke to him seconds before his accident on his mobile phone, said the man with a sad expression on his face. "Oh my word," I said, "you don't think that caused the accident? I mean, speaking on mobile phones has been known to be highly dangerous while you're driving." "No, it wasn't that. It was something else. When I spoke to him, I've never heard him sound so terrified in all his life. I could not get him to calm down. He kept saying that he was going to die. He reckoned he was being chased by a couple of bloodthirsty, black, hairy, ape-like monsters who he said looked distinctly humanoid. He said they were pelting his car with huge stones and roaring at him." "Wow," I said, thinking about the creature we'd seen earlier in the day. Could this thing have terrorized the poor man, I wondered? The description of the creature seemed uncannily similar to what we had just witnessed. "What did the autopsy say?" I asked curiously. I assumed there was one. "That's where the story gets more and more bizarre. It seems like the accident did not kill him straight away, but I think he was knocked unconscious. But they did find drag marks on the body, and his skull had been completely crushed by something very heavy. Worse still, it was suggested that rocks on the road had indeed overturned his vehicle." "So you think these creatures killed him?" I asked. "I have no doubt," said the man, "but we will never know who or what they were. Mark was no liar, so I truly believe his account. I've lived around these redwoods for years, and you mark my words, there is something in those forests, and whatever it is, it's not good." "Was he drinking that night?" asked my husband suddenly, as if looking for another plausible explanation for this young man's sudden demise. "No," said the man. "Mark only ever drank on special occasions, so no, he wasn't drinking, nor was he taking drugs." "Look," I said, "I think we should get moving after everything you've told us. It doesn't feel right staying here overnight. I've got a bad feeling about this." "No, please stay here," Mark insisted. "It's very dark around here at night, and you'll be worse off navigating your way around those redwoods. Personally, I think you should stay here until morning. As long as you don't mind ghosts," he teased. "A lot of people say they've seen Mark's ghost, and that's why I was warning you in the first place." We watched the man climbing back into his car and slamming the door behind him. He drove away, waving his hand at us. "What a nice man, and what a terrible story," I said, looking at my husband with a pained expression on my face. "I can't believe what he just told us." "That monstrous thing," said my husband, looking at me with wide eyes. "The thing we saw today. Well, that's the creature that must have killed the young man." "I agree," I said. "The profile fits too perfectly, almost too much. It could not have been anything else, but maybe the one we saw was innocent. There could be others around. They might be the guilty party, rather than the one we saw today." "My guess, it would be two territorial males," I suggested. I was awoken during the night to a loud crashing, thudding sound, like something hitting hard against a heavy barrier, and I looked out of the window to see the bright headlights of an upside-down car flashing against the redwood tree. I suddenly heard a car door being opened with a huge thud, followed by this heavy dragging sound like a body being pulled along the ground, and then I heard a mighty crushing sound like you would get if you stood on a thick ostrich egg and crush it with your feet. I was terrified and proceeded to shake my husband violently. "Get up!" I cried. "Something is going on outside our camper." My husband peered outside the camp window, and I heard him saying, "My God!" He looked at me in horror. "It's a reenactment of what happened to that young boy," he said. "The one that was killed at that tree." We watched the flashlights of the car just fade, and the upside-down car suddenly vanished from our sight, and we saw some bright yellow orbs dancing through the redwood trees. One of the orbs looked like it had the face of a young man in it, and he was looking directly at us, and I knew at once it was the young man that had died in the tragic scene. We almost got the impression that he was smiling at us, and so I waved at him, and surprisingly,
In that orb, he waved back at us. Finally, all the activity stopped, almost as quickly as it had started, and the orbs just disappeared and faded into the night. It was hard to make sense of what we had seen, but it had been real, and my husband is able to validate my claims. The following morning, when I got up, I drank some coffee and wandered towards the redwood tree that was involved in the accident. And there I saw a memorial stone planted next to the tree, saying in loving memory of our beautiful son Mark, "Gone too soon, you will be sorely missed." I then went and placed some flowers that I found growing in the valley onto the stone, and I wiped away a sorrowful tear. What a waste of a beautiful young life, I thought sadly. When we drove away from the area, I reflected on everything I had witnessed over the last 24 hours, and after some research, I discovered that the creature that we had seen was indeed a Bigfoot, and I believe it was Bigfoot-like creatures that had something to do with Mark's untimely death. So for someone who never believed in cryptid creatures like Bigfoot, or who never believed in the supernatural, my camper van trip around North America opened my eyes to a whole new reality. And my husband and I are much more open to things today, as we both have witnessed the supernatural and seen Bigfoot with our very own eyes.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.